your health. You can prevent this by turning the faucet off while washing your teeth, taking short showers, and check your house for leaks. There's a drought on, turn the water off.
afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the November 21st, 2017 meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Ms. Gomez, would you announce the roll, please?
Let the record state that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Oliveras.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Do we have a report on our closed session?
I think the council gave direction, the council gave direction to staff.
Thank you. We have no proclamations or presentations, no staff briefings. Mr. City Manager, do you have a report?
I do. I have a couple items. First, from the Community Engagement Department, the Welcome Roseland Community Celebration will be held on Saturday, January 20th from 12 to 4 at the Roseland Neighborhood Village. Staff from the Office of Community Engagement is working with Roseland residents, neighborhood groups, and local organizations to plan and bring this celebration to life. Outreach for this event will begin soon. From Housing and Community Development, Host has relocated 21 occupants under the underpasses to shelter and is working on an additional 10 individuals on placement. Outreach and engagement efforts were challenged by concerned citizens. Consequently, many of the occupants vacated the area rather being elected to place into services and shelter, including a group that is apparently relocated to Roseland Village. Host will continue to engage these individuals and others from the encampment at the 101 underpasses as they learn where those individuals are currently locating. While it is not an intent to displace people to the Roseland Village, the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, which oversees engagement efforts at that property, was aware of the city plans and is preparing and to continue their engagement opportunities at that location. The team also worked diligently over the last few weeks to ensure adequate services and shelter for all those willing to accept services, including hotel vouchers in the event that shelter beds were not available and storage for personal belongings. Staff will bring forward an agenda item on December 12th requesting funding to add up to 25 beds to Samuel Jones Hall to assist with the ongoing pilot program. Police enforcement resulted in 3 arrests for violations unrelated to the encampment and 32 infraction citations, primarily for sidewalk obstruction and littering. Police are working with TPW to remove any remaining trash and debris and to coordinate a cleanup of the area subject to transportation and public works availability. Host conservation crew did a cleanup of the area on Friday. The TPW construction process at 6th Street has been delayed as crews have been deployed to assist with our mitigation efforts in the Fountain Grove area. Following Council's approval of funding for the Homeless Services Center last Tuesday, Catholic Charities offered expanded hours will offer expanded hours at the center starting next week. Staff will be meeting with Catholic Charities to determine their capacity to shift services at the center to a housing first model and to further expand hours and days of service as requested by the council.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Are there any statements? Is there any report from the City Attorney's Office?
There's no report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any statements of abstention tonight from council members? Thank you. Go to mayors and council members' reports. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to report out that we did have, we lost the city manager. We did have a joint recovery ad hoc meeting last week between the city and the county that I was able to attend. And I was going to ask the city manager, when we originally passed the quality of life ordinance dealing with some of the issues that we have been seeing through the underpassing, part of it was contingent upon discussion from the council of having a restorative justice piece to it as well, and I have not seen that yet. So I would like a report back from the city manager or from staff at either the next meeting or a following meeting about where we are working with the district attorney's office to have that component as well.
I got that, and I'll note that down and talk to the city manager.
Anything else, Mr. Rogers? Anyone else? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also attended that ad hoc meeting, and in addition, I think at least you, Mayor, of course, you were there along with, I know we had another council member, I think at the council and mayor's meeting up in Hillsburg on Thursday, hearing another presentation from FEMA and the Cal OES. Additionally, we heard a nice presentation from a consultant out of San Rafael who actually studies cities who have gone through different disasters and how they have, what helped them in their recovery processes. So I think that's going to be a great resource for us and other cities in attendance. That was great information. Also attended the Economic Development Board's Fall Economic Forecast with guest speaker Chris Thornburg. I know several city staff were there, and there's also some excellent information, at least from Mr. Thornburg's perspective, about some of our recovery efforts. And then on Monday, November 20th, attended our Groundwater Sustainability Agency board meeting. One action that we did take, we authorized our interim administrator to enter into a contract with Reftelis Financial Consultants to provide the agency a fee analysis and rate setting services for an amount not to exceed $85,000. What much of the board was emphasizing with the consultants and our interim administrator is the importance of community outreach with this effort. So as whatever we're going to be doing with our groundwater study, we really wanted to emphasize we want input from the public. So these consultants will be very active in that, and I will be bringing to this board other opportunities when these members of our community can give their feedback about any groundwater concerns or issues. Thanks.
Mr. Schwedhelm, does the agency have a website at this point?
Yes, they do. I believe it's SonomaCountyGroundwater.org.
Okay, thank you.
No, it is SonomaCountyGroundwater.org. In fact, on that website also is the presentation that we received during our board meeting. So a lot of great information about how we actually obtain groundwater. So I found it very educational.
Thank you. Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you. Hey, Director Yoon, or I should say Assistant City Manager. It's good to see you in that seat. I wanted to ask you, actually Sean too, but he's not here, so I'll ask you, when is the Housing and Infrastructure Bond Committee meeting next?
We canceled our meeting this week, and our next meeting will be, I believe, 2 weeks out. So I will get an agenda out and an update to the council on when that meeting is to make sure we keep that back on track. So I apologize for having to cancel the meeting this week.
Okay, that's all right. Do you know if we ended up executing that contract with TBWD and FM3 for public education?
I don't know, but I'll make a note and check for you.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to bring up is actually from my colleagues. Earlier in the year, I was actually at a family reunion over in Oregon, and while I was there, I picked up the Oregonian that day, and there was an article on the work that the Joint Office of Homeless Services, that was a joint operation between the Multnomah County Commissioners and the Portland City Council. And in my conversation, I ended up actually reaching out to the director, and his name is Mark Jolin, and having coffee with him, and I asked him all about the work that Portland was doing on the issue of homelessness. And a lot of the things that they're experiencing are pretty identical to our own. They're working up against extreme housing prices, development constraints, but they are working in a housing-focused way, bringing about more shelter beds, among a whole host of other things. But in it, I actually wanted to, after the last few meetings where we've been dealing with homeless issues, is put down kind of the crux of that conversation in a piece of paper which is in front of all of you. And at this point, all I'm asking for is that you just review it if you have time in the next week or so. And we're obviously subject to Brown Act constraints, but I just wanted to get in front of you to try to share a point of view. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. That concludes council member reports. Number 11 is approval of minutes. We have a set of minutes from the special meeting of October 13th. Does anybody have any corrections or additions to those minutes? We'll show those approved as submitted. And moving on, no consent items. Too early for public comment. Move to 14.1. I'm sorry, for what? For non-agenda items. As you'll see, we don't do that earlier than 5 p.m., so we'll come back to that. Thank you. Mr. Ewan, 14.1.
Thank you. Item 14.1 is a report, amendment to grant agreement for Homeless Outreach Service Team host program, and presenting tonight will be Kelly Kuykendall from our Housing and Community Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor Corsi, members of the council. The item before you this evening seeks funding or an amendment to our existing host agreement to reimburse Catholic Charities for funds expended to operate the disaster shelter at the Finley Community Center for 1 week. This slide here just provides some background on the host program. As you know, the city first, or the council first sponsored a host program in 2015. HOST is a street outreach team that works to engage individuals experiencing homelessness into services and housing as part of the overall Housing First strategy or approach. In June, as part of the budget, council approved funding for HOST in a contract in the amount of $466,450 for the current fiscal year. We also, as you know, as part of the host program, operate the mobile bathroom shower at various locations throughout the city, and that's used as an outreach tool as well. On October 9th, as we all know, the city manager declared a local emergency as a result of the fires. The American Red Cross operated a number of disaster shelters throughout Sonoma County, and in anticipation of the 2 shelters that remained open at the fairgrounds and the Finley Community Center, the city manager's office reached out to Catholic Charities and requested if they could operate the shelter at the Finley Community Center for a 1-week period when the Red Cross closed operation of the disaster shelter. There were approximately 70 people in the shelter at that time. Catholic Charities agreed to take that on, took over operation for the period November 1 to November 7, and worked with the individuals there, offering them a number of services to place them. As I mentioned, the amendment provides $20,000 to reimburse them for expenses for operation between November 1 and November 7. They worked with all of the individuals there. There were approximately 70 individuals, and they were able to place all of them. Jenny Lynn is here, and she can provide you details on those placements and operations during that 1-week period if you have any questions. The Sonoma County Community Development Commission, our partner on many initiatives around homelessness, has offered $10,000 to cost share the $20,000 in this agreement, and I'm actually working with them right now on a funding agreement, which we will be bringing to council in the next couple weeks. The bullet on successful placements is just the 70 that were there, the 70 that were placed, and like I said, Jenny Lynn can speak to that if you have any specific questions. With that, the Housing and Community Service Department recommends that council approve an amendment to grant agreement for Homeless Outreach Services Team program with Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Santa Rosa in the amount of $20,000, bringing the total amount under the agreement to $486,450 for the current fiscal year. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions on this item? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually just have a process question. I have no problem with approving the funding, the $20,000 after the fact, but just as a matter of process, in events like this where the city manager uses his authority, us as oversight, what happens if we don't approve it? Because by then, the services have already been delivered.
Well, I'm not fully familiar with the city manager's authority, but if it needs to be ratified by council and the council doesn't act, then we can't abide by the contract. We can't pay the money.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Combs?
I really appreciate that folks stepped forward and took emergency action during an emergency. I'm not concerned at all about having done so. I'm a little disconcerted that the Red Cross stopped sooner than I thought the disaster was completely over. I would have liked to have seen their support a little longer, and I would also very much have liked to have seen the Red Cross coordinate a little better with our helping agencies before they did this. I'm wondering, though, just through the winter months, our current contract with Catholic Charities has a quarterly report, and I'm just wondering if through the winter months, not necessarily a report out at council, but can we receive a monthly piece of information about how many are there, how many beds, who's gone to housing, how many vouchers are still available for hotels, just kind of the basics of a report out monthly through the winter months so that we know what we're working with and what was still needed.
I can do my best to try and meet that request. I mean, they do submit reports for the programs that we fund, and some of those are monthly and some of those are quarterly. Are you looking for a report out on the host program? Are you looking for a report out on Sam Jones Hall or Family Service Center, Home Service Center?
I think I'm looking for a report out on the programs that we are funding with the $480-some thousand that we have listed here.
That's for the host program, and
okay,
we do quarterly reports, which...
And I'm asking, can we get that monthly for the winter?
Okay.
Thank you. I mean, it may need to be an amendment to the motion. That's what I'm trying to sort out.
Well, my question would be, the quarterly reports are part of the contract, is that not so?
Yes, they're part of the contract. So I mean, I can do my best as staff to try and get you updates on a monthly basis about the host program, but you bring up a good point, Mayor Corsi.
This is a contract amendment. That's why I'm asking it now.
Are you asking to amend the contract?
We're amending the contract by increasing it by $20,000. I thought we might be able to amend it the other way.
Well, I think the scope of what's in front of us is a contract amendment for the services that were rendered during the shelter. So if we're asking for other changes, that would need to come back in a future item.
Obviously, if this is a great difficulty, I understand that if it creates too much difficulty. But if it is possible, it would be really nice to know through the winter months what we have available and what's going on. So again, I'm just asking staff if it's possible.
I think it's a request that we could make of our vendor under the contract to see if it's something that they can accommodate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Schwartem.
So I will take you up on that offer. I am interested in learning how we found housing or options for 70 people from our friendly community centers. So if that would be Ms. Holmes.
Hello. Thank you for the question. It was quite a feat to work with the 70 individuals, and I will say what it took was short of a very great collaborative effort on many people's parts. So some of the people that we were able to work with, we actually were able to place directly into housing. We placed 9 households into permanent housing straight from the shelter. Some of that was in coordination with FEMA and some of those resources. Some of it was in coordination with some additional funds we had gotten through a private donor, and that allowed us to be flexible to meet the needs of the individuals. We launched a $500 landlord incentive program for sign-on bonuses, which helped us with getting some of those households placed. Additionally, we were able to use some funds that were given to us through the fire recovery program for people who were affected by the fire to place them into hotels. We placed 6 households into hotels, and then the rest we were able to work with our partners, Redwood Gospel Mission, Committee on the Shelter List in Petaluma, as well as some additional bed open space we opened in our Family Sports Center dining room to give people options. So for everyone else, they were given the option of Redwood Gospel Mission, Catholic Charities, or Mary Isaac Center. And all but one person took us up on those offers. So they're given choice in the transportation to every single facility. We also had a donor who helped us with transitional gift cards for people. So everyone also got a gift card to help them with their transitional needs. So lots of collaboration that allowed us to utilize our existing system and maximize our space.
And did you, during the assessment, were you able to determine how many of the 70 were there as a direct result of the fire, and how many others had been experiencing homelessness prior to the fire?
Yes, so one of the things we did when we first got into the shelter was we did an assessment on every single individual. And our next step was to create a transitional housing plan for every single person in the shelter with, 1, 2, 3, what are your options and how can we help? In those assessments, we found that about 20 of the households, 20 of the 76, were people who were directly impacted by the fire. The rest of the individuals were people who were there homeless prior to the fire.
Thanks. Those are all the questions I had.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question for clarification regarding the request from Councilmember Combs in the enhanced reporting request. Did I miss it, or was there specificity on those areas that you wanted enhancement? Because I want to make sure that before staff leaves this afternoon, that they're really clear on what they will be asking either our contractor for or what they will have to be providing themselves. If it is indeed taking the exact reporting that host is doing and increasing it to a monthly basis as opposed to quarterly, that's one question. If it's a particular piece of information that you feel would be important to have them impart to us, that's another question. So, I may have missed it, but is there a great deal of clarity on what the request is?
I have clarity in my own mind. Whether or not staff has perceived what my clarity is another question altogether. I'm asking that the quarterly report be provided monthly through the winter months so that we can follow what's going on through the bad weather, the rains, etc. And also because people contact me and ask me, what services are still available, how many beds there still are, basic things. So I'm hoping that information can come a little more frequently so that we can be more helpful during the bad weather. Okay. And again, I want to be clear that I'm not asking for time during our council meetings. I'm asking to receive a report.
Okay. And my concern is that I don't know how much time it would take to generate that report.
Right, I understand.
So I'm very concerned right now, especially of adding extra burdens to the staff and reporting when some of the reporting may have virtually nothing to do with what the community is interested in. So I'm just a little sensitive to a request that has lacking specificity.
So
we might differ regarding the substance, but I also understand that if there's a difficulty, staff will ask more clarifying questions and can discuss it with the service provider for how difficult it is or isn't. Thank you.
So we've taken a note of that, and we will evaluate that and talk to the service provider.
Great, thank you. Council, any other questions? I have a couple of cards on this. Gregory Furon. He'll be followed by Scott Wagner.
Well, as usual, you anticipated my question. I too would like to see more frequent information, and I understand the difficulty of trying to come up with on the spot or in an hour or whatever how you have performed over the last period of time, but it seemed to me that in this case the $20,000 had already, or 30 had already been spent. It took 5 minutes for Jenny to give you exactly what I was asking for you to get on a regular basis. How many beds are available? What did you do with the people? Did you assessment? It was a wonderful presentation. Put it in writing so that all of us can have it and it can be circulated. Now, I agree with John that what you're asking for, which is the scope of work outcomes, really doesn't even get to what she said. It's a lot of process outcomes that are all about, did you answer the phone 700 times? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how many people did you serve, how many people went to, were placed in permanent housing, exactly what you are paying her for. And that's going to take a scope of work change before you're ever going to get that kind of information. But I hope for it, and I hope that you will improve your scopes of work with all of your contractors to have much more measurable, much more impact outcomes as you want, rather than a bunch of process things saying you're going to have a certain amount of hours operating or whatever, which is what your scope of work really says now. I hope that you will get, either by changing the host contract or the other $500,000 you give to operate Sam Jones, a real set of outcomes that we in the community can understand and work with. The other thing I just want to point out is, if you'll remember what she just said, 2/3 of the placements were done by not your money at all, by the community, by us. And we need to know how it's working. Thank you.
Scott Wagner will be followed by Thomas Ells.
Council members. You get 6 minutes of Gregory today. I'll be a little bit more pointed. I expect to see on the people's desk every day, I expect to see how many beds are available. And it doesn't have to be sacredly perfect, and there could be quid pro quos and difficulty with definitions and potential delays to get an email out. But we are owed that right to understand that, and that information is systematically withheld from us. Now that's ethically a problematic thing, and thus libelous, of course. I mean, you can talk about them being a private entity or nonprofit, and that's fine, but we expect the city to deliver that information to us on a regular basis. And that is your specificity, Councilmember Sawyer. There are other pieces of data, of course, I'd be interested in, and now let me stop, because I've done enough of that. They did a hell of a job, as far as I'm concerned, in a lot of ways. They did a lovely job, and you're to commend them in a lot of that work. And they managed to corral a whole sense of community. So thank you for the work that you did. But it's a transparency issue. They're acting on your behalf, and you owe us that right to understand. And when we go to somebody and we say, we don't know how many beds there are, we don't know if they have beds, they won't tell us. Or they'll tell us, yeah, we have beds. How many do you have left? Because this guy, I'm going to try and corral him for 7 hours. So I look forward to having a meeting with a group of various nonprofits with you to discuss how we work together to establish safety and security for these people in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas Ells.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this issue in particular. So we understand that there were approximately 76 individuals left at Finley Center after the homeless were required to leave. So the homeless people were required to leave. And they were told, get out. You can either get out now and get nothing, or you can get out and get $300. Which would you like? And I'm sorry to say that might have been the Red Cross. I don't know. I'm trying to get statements from the people. They definitely told me they got the $300. They got out. And then there were 76 people. But to say that I was homeless, as was just brought to my attention, they were homeless. They were homeless people, and they were there at Finley Center, but they were not homeless from before that time. There were definitely other homeless people, and they were required to get out. And that wasn't Catholic Charities per se. I don't know that it was at all. And Catholic Charities did do a great job in many respects, and we helped them. St. Vincent, we did a lot of things. Forgive me if I mention that. And they did a great job. They received private donations. I understand they received $250,000 of private donations for the fire-related services, so that's great. Julie, I think you should be able to get the coordinated entry information. That should be available on the computer, available every day. It's very important to know how many beds are available every day. Because how are you going to assign somebody to a bed? I mean, that's the coordinated entry. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to know exactly how many beds there are and be able to assign those beds. So that should be able to be known. And there's a difference between the outcomes of the award or the contract, the outcomes and the goals and the status of it at any particular time, and those things that are required in order to achieve that, such as the hours and so on. That's one thing. I mean, that's sort of what that's the structure. That's not the outcomes. Those aren't the outcomes. So you want to get the outcomes. That's really what we want. We want to be able to see the outcomes, how that performs in the community to achieve the housing, because that's really the goal. So thank you very much. I appreciate everything.
Thank you. Bring it back to the council. Mr. Schwedhelm, you have this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving an amendment to grant agreement between the City of Santa Rosa and Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Santa Rosa for the Homeless Outreach Services Team Program for fiscal year 2017-2018, and waive further reading the text.
Second.
May I ask that you use your I legislate voting to motion and second?
Everybody on here? Do you need the mover and the seconder on here? Bear with us while we deal with newish technology. And does this get displayed on the screen for the public?
Sorry, it looks like in the back they didn't start up the VoteCast display.
Okay. We'll let you know the outcome of the vote. Your votes, please, council.
Oh, there it is. It's up on display now. Why is it?
Doesn't seem to want to take mine. Can we record 6 ayes on this one?
That's correct. It's not going to display it again.
Thank you. We'll move on to 14.2.
Okay, item 14.2 is a report item, Safe Parking Program. And again, Kelly Kuykendall is here to present.
Excuse me, the screen isn't clearing for us from the last vote.
Yeah. I'm going to suggest we let Ms. Kuykendall begin her report. We can see the screens here above us. Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay.
We're here this afternoon, going back to the October 4th council meeting. Council expressed interest in revisiting the idea of supporting safe parking. To provide you with some background, the County of Sonoma, specifically the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, supported a safe parking program for a number of years. That program concluded at the end of this past fiscal year, 2016-2017, as a result of cuts to funding to the state's program, the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and local funds went to support the Family Support Center. The program, the county-sponsored program, was operated by Catholic Charities. They provided $150,000 annually at 80 spots at scattered sites. Most of those sites were located in the city of Santa Rosa. The largest site was over at the county complex. As you know, in August of 2016, the city declared a local homeless emergency. Under that emergency, we've approved the Community Homeless Assistance Program, and under CHAP, safe parking is allowed on private property, specifically meeting facilities and commercial sites. Going back to August 2016, we also approved a declaration of shelter crisis, which allows for the use of public property for additional shelter, which could include safe parking. Going back a few weeks, when I was working on this item, I'd heard that the county was also looking at revisiting the idea of safe parking. Potentially a transitional vehicle housing program. And just learned yesterday afternoon that they are not looking at doing a safe parking program, so I won't be sharing information about that this evening. I'm sorry, that information is in the staff report, but it's been removed from the presentation. So we have put together some preliminary information on a potential city-sponsored safe parking program, including a few city sites. These include the Finley Community Center, the parking lot there, parking lot at the utility field office, the UFO, Sam Jones Hall shelter, and a private property, the KBBF property, which is located near Sam Jones Hall. Some other items to consider if you're looking at safe parking would be single site or scattered site. The program that the county had in the past was a scattered site program. Is the council interested in doing an overnight program, which is typically 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.? That was how the former county-sponsored program was modeled or structured. And what kind of services do you want to provide at the site or sites? Porta potties, showers, potentially some kind of community facility or community center. And also that each of the sites that I just mentioned have unique constraints that would drive what your program might look like. And of course, the Housing First Focus program, I know that's an interest of council. It's part of your strategy. Safe parking program, in order to be Housing First, would have to be adequately staffed so that you can move people into housing. So that's case managers and housing navigators. Also, you want to make sure that there are resources to link people to housing, such as rapid rehousing funding. And that is just some preliminary information we have for you on safe parking. Subject to your direction that tonight we would come back, if you choose to support this, with a budget and a program. We don't have that for you this evening. It's just preliminary information. With that, the Housing and Community Services is recommending that council by motion confirm its interest in supporting a safe parking program. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Kuykendall. Just want to make sure what you're looking for tonight, and that would be, number one, whether we want to push this thing forward or not. If so, though, are you looking for details such as the type of services, whether we want it to be Housing First? Are you looking for us to point you to specific sites, or would this be more of a report back at some future date where you give us the pros and cons of different sites and different configurations?
I would say tonight, personally, I'm looking for direction on whether you all want to support safe parking, and if you have certainly any ideas about what that program might look like, we can take that back and take all that in consideration while we're developing a program.
Okay. And then you would come back also with costs and potential providers or an RFP. How would that work?
That's a good question, something I've thought about already. I know we haven't had a safe parking program before, aside from allowing for it under our CHAP program. So I'm not sure how we would go through that, if it would be an RFP. I mean, certainly I would be looking to the county and Catholic Charities for information about, their safe parking program and how they did it before, so we can consider all that while we're designing our program, but I'm not sure at this point in time if that would entail an RFP.
All right. Councilor, are there questions for Ms. Kuykendall? Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm heartened by your reference to the county's assistance in that they have operated a safe parking program and have experience and might be able to help us avoid some pitfalls and consider some enhancements. Just a number of days ago, the mayor and the chairman of the Board of Supervisors appointed an ad hoc subcommittee to deal with homelessness issues. And I'm wondering how we might benefit from their guidance at that level, and being able to come together as a group of that subcommittee, that ad hoc subcommittee, and come up with a recommendation. It seems that this would be the perfect opportunity to engage that group and to take advantage of their guidance.
Just as a point of information, the ad hoc that was appointed by myself and the chair of the board is specifically tasked with looking at the continuum of care and the leadership of that, not specifically to services at this point. So that ad hoc is tasked with looking at the recommendations of the consultants that were hired by the CDC to revamp the continuum of care rather than specific services.
Okay, I appreciate that. We would still be able to take advantage of their guidance with their experience in operating a program like this. I would think.
Absolutely, they have the experience, as does Catholic Charity as a provider, and like I said, I already reached out to them when I'd heard that they were looking at reinstating their program, so we'll definitely be asking them for insight and feedback on if you give us direction that you want a safe parking program.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice to be able to be part of this conversation. I wasn't able to be part of safe parking during the last time. But I'm really glad that we're looking at this because, even though I support the direction the city took months ago with regard to enforcement, the big thing for me is that if we're going to be enforcing those laws, we have to make sure that we have safe places for people to go and be safe and not be moved or enter the criminal justice system. So when I see these options, there's two ways that I see that we can go. And I want to kind of kick it out there to the council. The two sites that struck me the most was KBBF and an option that's not even on here, and that's City Hall. I like KBBF because to me it seems like it wouldn't even have to just be parking. That's a vacant, unutilized space where I think there might be able to be a little bit more around-the-clock occupation by people that might be a little bit less disruptive for them. With KBBF, I think if you were going to do something along those lines, you would absolutely want to apply a case manager, a housing navigator, or locator. And so between the costs of getting that property going, I understand they have a lien just shy of $100,000 on that property. So somehow working an agreement with them where we waive that and pay out of our general fund, plus the cost of adding on a case manager to make sure that we're doing this in a housing-focused way. And just like the Sam Jones Hall Shelter, this is a platform with which we lift people out of the situation and into housing. That's the way I think I'd like to see that potential option go. The other is if you have some place like City Hall where here's a parking lot that's completely unused at night, we have a bathroom facility right there that could be left unlocked, and we do have a high law enforcement presence in this area. It seems feasible to me that why couldn't we just open the space up from 7 to 7 and do it more cheaply that way, but people again have a safe place to go and park and sleep if they don't have another option. Could that be an option for us?
So we did staff look at or think about City Hall, and it's not here as one of the options, but certainly you have the choice of adding it into the mix of sites that we're looking at. There's business that often happens at City Hall that would overlap the hours of a safe parking program as well as on the weekends. I mean, I know that there's daytime activities that wouldn't necessarily interfere with an overnight program, but that was really one of the reasons why we didn't bring it forward tonight, is just the overlap, because meetings often run late. And people are oftentimes coming into the City Hall parking lot before 7 in the morning. I think you all see how impacted the parking lot is, even during the evening and early hours of the morning.
Okay. I mean, if it was possible to do City Hall, I kind of tend to like that one just because it's cost effective for us in a sense, and also this is a civic center, this is the people's house, so to speak, and there's also not a large neighborhood presence surrounding it, so we may benefit in that regard. But if that's not a feasible option for the staff, then it's not a feasible option, and I'd probably want to revert back to something like KBBF.
We can certainly look at it. I think, too, we want to think about, and I don't necessarily have that information tonight, about what kind of program we want to have, and then see which sites are going to work best for us. And I think that's something we can talk to the provider about and the Community Development Commission to see what really worked and what kind of issues they ran into with sites that they were operating.
Thank you. Further questions? Ms. Combs.
So my first take on this is thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're going to have an awful lot of RVs and people sleeping in cars from the fire, in addition to the existing homeless population. And we've already been talking about loosening up some of the RV rules so that folks can stay in a RV while they're rebuilding. And it really makes sense to me that we work with both populations, the newly homeless and the longer-term homeless, on being able to sleep safely overnight. My first look at this, I would wish we could find 24/7 sites so that folks don't have to leave and come back and leave and come back, because my recollection of previous programs is that gasoline became an issue for some folks, although some people are going to work in their car. But it seems to me that these different sites have different features that may not allow them to be 24/7. For example, if we added City Hall. So I'm wondering if it's possible to ask staff to, is one of the possible outcomes of our conversation that several sites be chosen, that they might have different characteristics? Is it going to get too complicated that way, or does that work? That we might even want to think about sites as having particular characteristics. For example, a site of couples and single women, or a site of couples, single women, and family, and then maybe a different site for veterans, or a different site for folks who are having trouble having been kicked out of other programs. I mean, we might want to have some characteristics of sites, and I would expect Catholic Charities would have ideas about that. How does that work? So I'm wondering if is it possible for us to ask for you to come back with considerations like that and multiple sites? Is that something we can be asking you from here? Do you need a yes or no on 24/7?
I think that we can look at a number of options. If that's what council wants, then that's what we'll look at.
We'll get to that in discussion.
I understand we'll discuss it, but I'm just asking, is it possible to go there?
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Kelly. What is your understanding of the reasons that the county chose not to fund safe parking?
Going back to July, when the program was suspended, is that your question? Or okay, so
you said at some point you heard that they were going to do it, and
right.
that was in our staff report, and then now it's nowhere. So what led to that understanding that they're going to do it or not do it?
So I don't have all the background on it. I just, council said a few weeks ago, we want to look at safe parking, and then I heard that the county was looking at it, and so I reached out to them and got some information that they were looking at a preliminary program. Why they decided not to move forward with that, I don't know. We just learned yesterday and trying to confirm, what's going on with your program. We're bringing this to council tomorrow night, that they were not moving forward with it. The specifics I'm unaware of. Going back to when the program was suspended or ended in July, that had to do specifically, as you know, with the cuts to the Emergency Solutions Grant program.
Okay. And is safe parking considered a best practice that works to end homelessness?
Excellent question. I haven't looked at any models that are necessarily recognized for that. I think that we can strive, if you decide you want to have a safe parking program, I think you can try to make it as housing first as possible, and then that would align with best practices. But my understanding of the program before that, the county's program operated by Catholic Charities, is it was not housing first.
And so how would you describe some of the models you were talking about? Was it more of a process to get into housing or a destination?
So, what I have looked at is the program that the county had before that Catholic Charities operated. My understanding of it is it's more of a destination. And in speaking, at least initially, with Catholic Charities in the county about what they were thinking about doing, which is not moving forward, is that it would be housing first focused, that it would be more than just a destination, that there would be case management there to support people to get them into housing.
And in order for it to be a housing first program, would that be a 24/7? How often would the case managers be there? What about some of those other offers or suggestions that you want to feedback from the council?
So some of the ideas that I've heard kind of tossed around, and this is all like initial conversations, and like I said, I need to sit down with the county, learn more about what worked with their program, what didn't, and also with the provider, is that based on what they did before, a single site model would probably be better, and 24/7 with services for case management, so that it can be more in line with housing first best practices.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you for the presentation. I remember when we discussed this months ago, one of the concerns that was expressed by the council was taking the costs or taking the dollars that could be used for shelter beds or a housing navigator and shifting them instead into safe parking that was viewed as a mitigation aspect of addressing homelessness. And I remember that there was a conversation at the time about CHAP, about asking the public to be a part of the solution to allow a safe parking program to go forward, or even the encampment idea to go forward on some private property as well. To date, has anybody stepped forward to help with that?
There were a number of churches that were participating in the County and Catholic Charities program. And one church has approached me in September, October, stating that they wanted to continue with their program. And so, that meets CHAP guidelines, and it's fine. I said, as long as you're meeting all the CHAP guidelines, then you can proceed with that. And there's one other property that I'm aware of that is continuing their safe parking program. So right now there's only 2 that I know of, but there might be more out there that continued their program without our knowledge.
That'd be something that I'd be interested in having a conversation about, is how do we really engage the community to say that we need help solving this problem, that we as a city do not have the resources to do it alone, and that we need buy-in from others to help solve this. I too have questions about why the county decided to pull back ultimately. I think that that'd be a really helpful piece of information for us in making our decisions. In particular, when I start to think about places that may be able to handle a program such as this, I'm concerned about Sam Jones Hall, just because I know that a lot of the parking lot is already utilized by those who are staying at the hall, and trying to figure out if they'd have room for the program. The KBBF site sounds much better to me, but then I think about places like the Vets Hall and the campgrounds that obviously are under the county's jurisdiction. Can we engage the county in, even if they are not managing a program, allowing us to work with them on some form of a site-specific plan? And on that same note, we just had hundreds of people evacuated to these areas living in cots from the Office of Emergency Services. Where did those cots go? And is there, during the winter months, doing some form of program through the Vets Hall or the campgrounds to utilize some of that space in a housing first type focus, to be able to actually put a roof over people's head and have a bed for them to sleep in? And so I don't know where the cots went. I do know that somebody at the county turned down additional cots, and that really distresses me to hear. And so I want to make sure that we take the resources that we have and utilize them in a way that is effective for the community. And to me, I'd rather put people on cots in a location than use dollars for the safe parking program if I had to choose between the two. If that's not feasible, though, and we're going to talk about mitigation, I'm happy to have that conversation going forward.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, it's clear that there are lots of questions out there that need to be answered, including costs, et cetera. So I'm curious, if we were to move down the road with Housing First, and I am, just make it clear, I'm interested in the, not Housing First, but the safe parking program, and I would be interested in it being backed up with the Housing First program. But what I'm curious about is why, if it had all of the elements that I would expect if I were to be reading a program that I appreciate, that I liked or could support. What I don't understand is why having a car it sounds almost exclusive. And if we had all the rest of the pieces of the program in place, the monitoring and the restrooms or the porta potties, whatever it might be, and it was, let's just, for sake of argument, it was a 7 to 7 environment. It was not 24/7 yet. Why would we not be able to allow someone in a tent as opposed to someone who has metal around them in a car if all the rest of the things were equal? So I'm not talking about barbecues, and I'm not talking about camping in the way most people think of it. I'm talking about people that are in a tent. They don't happen to have a car, and all the other things being equal, why they would be excluded, or I'd like to have that conversation, is how we could create a program that could include people that don't happen to have a car, given all of the monitoring that would go on in a well-run environment like that. So I just think it should be perhaps considered.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Got a few cards here. Pat Nicholson should be followed by Scott Wagner.
Good evening. So it recently came to my attention that the City Council had money for safe parking and gave it away, and now there is no more safe parking being offered by the city? So I hear this has already been discussed since July, which is when this conversation took place, and you folks did not come up with answers or solutions. Apparently, I'm thinking you do need help to make this work, because what you've got going on right now is not really working. Plus the fact you think homeless prior to the fire are different from homeless now because of the fire. This is erroneous thinking. You have homeless, and unfortunately that group grew. And they all have the same need. They need to be sheltered, they need to be housed. So whether they're housed or sheltered in a tent or a car, a place to be until they can be someplace else could be a solution. This could work, and you don't have to invent it. San Francisco calls these things navigation centers. And it's been shown, because there is a camp here in Santa Rosa that has run itself with assistance, but is still in existence, and that's the Camp Michaela site. Folks can be expected to step up because they've created a neighborhood for themselves that is safer than the street. And that's what this campsite, or the navigation center, or the parking lot, or whatever you want to call it, if you could actually make even one work, regardless of whether you need 24/7, or you need porta potties, or you need tents, or you need cars. Pick one place that you could make this work that would get people off the street, which is the goal. If you count in housing first and include all of that into this, those people will get a chance to get relocated, which is the goal. The sidewalk is not a destination. And I don't think anybody you ask will think that it is. Nobody who got removed from the underpass thought that this is where they want to spend the rest of their lives, or even any part of their lives at all, is on a sidewalk under a freeway. It's really not a choice, and now it's not even an option.
Thank you. Scott Wagner. He'll be followed by Thomas Els.
Hi, folks, again. I guess I kind of want to back up a little bit to when we defined safe parking as something that was broader. And so I think that's what we're all kind of hankering towards, is something that is actually, you know, that'll cover the X% of homelessness that cannot get into the shelter for whatever reason. We're trying to cover those guys. We all are, and it's difficult science. Fortunately, we have some really cool stuff that's being done. And I think also one thing that we need to recognize is that we have a lot of internal expertise on dealing with homelessness on the streets by our police force here. I don't know if anybody has said what a good job they did last week, but I want to do that. And I know that's, you know, that's going to break your guys' hearts, but no, it was a hard job. I don't think we had a whole bunch of arrests, you know. You guys set up this misdemeanor thing, which really pisses a lot of us off. And so, yeah, we issued 12 misdemeanors, which, you know, you guys all wanted. Okay. But Chief, Chief was just here. I don't know where he is, but I want to hear from him what constitutes risk with these kinds of things we're talking about. I feel like we got a third of the picture in here where we're bouncing around on the point. So if we could do that, some kind of formal, like, what do you think, Chief thing, that'd be awesome. If I had time, I would go into some detail. I don't, but they did all right, you know. I mean, it was a hard situation, and they talked to us a hell of a lot more than the Catholic Charities team did. You know, I mean, I hate to come back to that, but it is an issue. I mean, we all need to work together. And what from a PR standpoint makes sense is to define homelessness as you get them in a shelter and away you go. But we're trying to address these guys, and we need to remember that and try and figure out the science behind that. I will forward to the City Council a list of precedents in different cities. You know of some. I saw something from you, Jack. Thank you very much. That was informative and helpful. There is a way through this. We can fund something that takes care of these people that we're sweeping under the rug. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Ells, followed by Richard Canini.
Thank you very much for having this item, and I thank the Board of Supervisors when they had it. I want to say Safe Parking was very successful at moving people into housing. There were 28 families reported in 1 quarter, and that amounted to approximately 70 some odd people in 1 quarter being moved into housing. We need those statistics on an ongoing basis. There's no reason why we don't have statistics on these things. That's what we're asking for. Then we could all know and we could all see. But it was very successful. So to answer your question, Councilman Schwinholm, a majority of the Board of Supervisors supported safe parking, and Chairwoman Zane pledged to bring that item back before the board, and it will come back before the board. So it's really only a temporary thing. It sort of missed the item, but the majority of the Board of Supervisors supported it, and they said they will bring it back. So to say that it's gone or it's not, or we don't understand, we kind of have an idea why it's not in there, and it's going to come back according to what their agreements were and what they said. So do forgive me. I have some knowledge, very good knowledge of the county site, and the greatest element I think that brought fear into that was the people being released from the jail at 2 in the morning. So people being released from the jail at 2 in the morning walked back towards Safeway, the closest place that they could really get any services or anything, and going back into town, and they crossed right across the site. So that was bothering people. They would also use the porta potties and things like that. Diversity of sites, incredibly important. You want to have, some people smoke and some people are allergic to smoke, and you can't put those people right next to each other. So like at Fish, I know right now that there are 2 people like that. They're right next to each other. They can't be there. And they're probably both disabled, which means there needs to be accommodation for each of them. And that means you got to have separate sites, because really the people that they will smoke off site or something like that, and they say, no, I'm in my car, I can smoke. But it's right next to the other person's car, and they're allergic to smoke. And I mean, really allergic to smoke, and really bad problem. We need to think about very few parkers where they have few contacts with people, because they can't have that many contacts with people. That's a real problem for them. We should think of the Oregon model. It uses 1 person per site. They are the security guard for the site. They're the security guard. That's what Oregon does. So we looked into that. The benefits of having people in their cars, that they're mobile and they can go to where the services are. Because if you don't do that, they get tickets, they get fined, and they lose their car, and now they have no ability to move. And that's why you got to bring the services to them rather than them being available. So thank you very much.
Mr. Ells. Richard Canini, followed by Samuel Cox.
Greetings. People are at risk right now. This living out there is detrimental to their health. It'll shorten their lives. It's one reason people die early when they're homeless. You've seen statistics on that. This idea about housing first, well, how long? How long should they wait? How long would you like to wait out in the rain for housing first? Let's not forget that the perfect is often enemy of the good. How about we turn a parking garage over completely to homeless? Pick one. Let them have the whole thing. A term I swore I'd never use, 24/7. Give them a garage. This community, we pull together. People think parking their cars is more important than sheltering the homeless. Let's find out if the city has a soul. A couple of sites, this would involve the county. One is the water agency site in West College. That was where Camp Michaela was, and Dr. Eppel was a key player in that. At that site, there's a bus transfer point, there's a food store, there's paved parking, and there's a building that's vacant, a big vacant building. That's the county's, but it's in the city. How about under 101 at the fairgrounds? There's a store nearby. It's served by buses, City Bus and Golden Gate Transit. How about under 101 at Railroad Square? But put the porta potties in there. The big complaint was people were defecating on the street. This city received a grant for a porta potty and rejected the grant for the porta potty. You're not interested in helping these people. You're interested in roughing them out. Realize this, too, that other than the fire people displaced, long-term homelessness is a direct result of the 2007 financial fraud. We haven't worked our way through that yet. Those bankers, beginning with Greenspan, defrauded the people, and then the Democrats bailed out the bankers. And remind you that you have participated in municipal bonds, creating tax-free income for Wall Street. The bonds are paid back by the taxpayers. Wall Street profit from these bonds is tax-free. You're part of the problem. And have you looked into obtaining FEMA trailers? Yeah? Okay. Oh, you know that little voice that says, don't say that? I don't have one of those voices. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Samuel Cox, followed by John Kruger.
Just an FYI, I'm Sam Cox from First United Methodist Church with our Homeless Ministries Task Force, and we did express an interest. I think Kelly's comments referred to our program. We have been gearing up to restart safe parking at our Stony Point location. In fact, met with Catholic Charities in the county this afternoon and are beginning the process of receiving referrals and hope to restart our program within the next week on a small-scale basis as we did under the previous safe parking program. So just thought I would offer that to you. Thank you.
Thank you. John Krieger.
Hi, I'm John Krieger from the First United Methodist Church, and I'm very pleased that you're considering reviving safe parking. It's an effective program. It's been pretty trouble-free. There haven't been a lot of complaints talking to the city officials, and it did help a lot of people, and it can help a lot of people. In our meeting with the county and Catholic Charities this afternoon, we pretty much agreed, those of us from the church and the county and Catholic Charities, that this is consistent with Housing First. If you've got an emergency room, using that analogy, and you've got a waiting room that's full, it's okay to let people sit in their cars in the parking lot rather than saying you can't do that either. So we encourage you to go ahead and CHAP was a good idea. Let's actually use it. I think we've all discovered that anything having to do with housing and homeless people is very difficult and takes a lot longer and a lot more effort than we ever thought, we ever dreamed. But let's keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bring it back to the council. Do you want to put a motion on the table, Ms. Combs?
I do have this item. I'm wondering if I can ask some questions as we move forward. First, let's just do the go or no-go and make a motion to confirm that the council has an interest in supporting safe parking program.
I'll second it.
We have a question here.
The question of, for me, the question of support and the question of of information regarding costs, possible sites, etc. So supporting suggests something that I don't want to suggest at this point. So if it's purely to support it, without those questions being answered, I wouldn't be able to vote yes at this time until some of those questions are answered. If the question about gaining more information in which to make the decision, then I could go forward. But you only need 4.
Do you have a word that you would like me to put in here as a friendly amendment? I'll get you. So would you like to say confirm an interest in exploring?
Sounds great to me.
Okay. I'm willing to modify to that because I figured I'd go through the other questions one at a time after that.
You still want to second that? Mr. Tibbetts?
Well, I'm going to actually, as we go through the questions and comments, I just heard Ms. Combs state that she might amend it further, so I'm happy to still second it, but I think it's a good idea to maybe provide more pointed direction.
We'll keep going.
We will. Yes.
Okay, so right now I have it as explore. So scattered versus single site. If I were making this motion, I would encourage more than one site. In part because I think that while the KBDF site is a really excellent site to be exploring and there's a lot of possibilities there, I am concerned that we are emphasizing one side of our city or one area more than other parts. So I'm thinking that rather than only having one site, it's fruitful to have multiple sites. If we did...
Can I just stop you for a minute, Ms.
Sure.
Ms.
So
Combs,
that's why I'm asking. If I would have moved it that way, does someone want me to amend it, and where is the vote on that?
Well, I have a feeling that there's going to be some differing opinions on each of these details here, and I'm going to ask Ms. Dillon for some guidance about a suggested way to go forward and just make it a little more efficient.
Well, one option would be just to vote on the current motion that there's confirmation of the council to explore, and then there could be subsequent separate motions that would show position of the council as a whole on particular issues, as opposed to trying to make one large amendment. That may be assistive.
Okay.
Otherwise,
I have trouble with the weakness of exploring. I was hoping that as we went through the items, we could come back at the end and strengthen explore to support based on having questions answered that may have come up, but that may not be possible.
So you could table that one and then go to a more specific motion first.
Let's try this.
I'll take direction from the...
Rather than putting a motion on the table, why don't we just have a discussion? Council members, let us know your thinking on these many items that are in front of us, and maybe we can let that gel into a motion at the end.
If I may repeat the list was site, scattered versus single, and under site there were a number of sites listed. 24/7 or overnight only, or a combination. Services to be provided, for example, sanitation, porta potties, hand washing, showers, community center. Housing first or housing forward. And that would involve, that's one, I'm lumping those two phrases. And that involves staff with costs of provider. So that does increase costs. I think it's the way to go myself, but it increases costs. So that's the list that I'm aware that we're directing.
There was also a question about tents.
I didn't ask that because I recall the definition of safe parking previously included tents from some time ago, if you read the CHAP guidelines. So I was assuming that a well-regulated tent was included. So I wasn't asking that question.
All right. Who wants to start? Mr. Tibbetts?
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to preface this conversation by saying that I don't believe that what we're talking about tonight is a solution. but I do believe it can complement the great work you've already done, specifically you, Kelly, and Jenny Lynn. I just heard that so far, I think since we initiated this program back in July, we've housed about 50 people through this process of into Sam Jones Hall and then into permanent shelter. And I think that's something to give ourselves a pat on the back about, and all of you as well. But I keep coming back to my original position, which is that we need to have a safe place for people to go while we have these stepped up regulations in the city. So one of the things that I believe is that we should not be scattered. I've spoken with service providers, and it's much more difficult. I am a service provider. When you have to have an employee run around to multiple locations a day, it becomes unfocused and burdensome. I also think that if I had to pick a site based on what I know of this council and our unanimous support for Housing First, I think that the best location is KVBF's property. It's actually pretty fortuitous. I took a tour of KVBF's facility last week. They have a 22,000-foot concrete pad. They have a building on site that could serve as an office for a case manager with a Housing First focus. I think there's a lot of benefits. They also have well and septic out there. I don't know how active they are, but there are these assets that we could look at. I also believe that tents are okay. And another reason why I'm leaning towards KVBF is potentially the best location, even though it's probably going to be the most expensive, is that it is a location that can be 24/7, which, as you just stated, Kelly, and I think you're correct, is a better environment to actually do something in a housing-focused way. So if we're going to be housing-focused, that would be my preference. If the cost becomes too much for this council, I will revert back to wanting us to look at just say City Hall and open the doors from 7 to 7, and we work out the details as we go, but people have to have a safe spot.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
So I think my comments before and my questions before are still going to carry forward, that I'm fine with us moving forward the discussion and talking about it, but I do think we need to do a better job of engaging other interested parties in this as well. So on the question of scattered versus single, if we have multiple businesses or nonprofits or religious institutions that are willing to partner with the city to move forward with safe parking for the CHAP program, as they already can do, I want us to be able to do that, and that would then end up being a scattered approach to it. And I think that that's actually perfectly fine. My concern will be about the cost, and in particular, what we could do with the dollars instead. So we have been very focused on housing solutions, and I think that the conversation we've had previously is how are we going to define success as a city? And what we've come up with, the marker, is how many people we get off the streets. And so for our limited resources to be able to get people into housing placement, even if it's in the shelter or temporary transitional housing that ultimately leads to permanent housing, this is mitigation. And I'm fine with us having that conversation, but I want us to be very clear that we need to design it in a housing first way. So it isn't just mitigation at the end of the day, but it actually is focused on that outcome of how we're defining success. Again, I want to reiterate reaching out to the county about some of the areas that we talked about, the Vets Hall, the fairgrounds, engaging them in this conversation as well, and talking about the duration of this program, what the cost would be to keep it if we were to decide to do it year-round versus using it as an option during the rainy season. I do like the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. A little bit better than 24/7, just because we do know, and what we have seen is that there's going to be a balance between having services for people and also the impacts that it'll have on the neighbors as well. I think that it's a little bit easier to have a conversation about a housing focus that's going to help get people into permanent services that won't look like a permanent year-round encampment in certain areas. And I am concerned about the KBBF property in that I already hear from neighbors that the agreement from the city before was fewer beds at Sam Jones Hall than we're already doing, and making sure that there's a shared approach in our community to addressing this and not shoving it all into one corner. I think I hit on everything you might need.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mayor. So one of the challenges in this, and although I appreciate staff asking us for directions, I don't think any of us sitting up here have ever run an emergency shelter. And so you're asking some non-subject matter experts for our opinions that, quite frankly, I'd rather hear from the subject matter experts who actually have run shelters. What would it be? Would it be better to be, decentralized or centralized? So again, I have an opinion, but it's based on what? We've talked about these other sites. Unless we've run it, I can't anticipate all the challenges there is to managing a site, whether it's safe parking or any other. One of the things I do want to just go back to, back in April, Housing and Community Services brought 2 subject matter experts to talk about housing first and reaffirm that this is the direction that the council wanted to go. Some of the things that they shared with us is how you get there, ending homelessness, not just managing it, is emergency shelters must be housing focused. So that's not my opinion, that's subject matter experts that were brought to this community to have this discussion. County, city, state, and continuum of care funds must be targeted to housing solutions. And community leadership needs to be aligned in support of best practices that work to end homelessness. That's why I asked you that question. So we brought in some subject matter experts, asked us, how do we end homelessness versus just managing it? That's what they told us. So my concepts are all consistent with what we've been hearing, because if we do these one-offs, we're not using our dollars in the most efficient way possible. So if we want to continue to explore safe parking, from my perspective, it absolutely has to be housing first focused. We heard that from the experts. If we want to go to the direction of actually ending homelessness, that's it. If we just want to manage it, and we've been doing that for years, managing it, then don't have it housing focused. The challenge with the services and what you will need to come back with us ultimately, so yes, let's explore safe parking. And then let me know what that dollar figure is. Because we heard from Catholic Charities, the emergency shelters, they were able to find housing for 70 people. And I know there's other data that are housing focused shelters. We're housing people. It is actually working. And by doing that, that's freeing up beds in Sam Jones Hall that we hadn't had before, because we're focusing those dollars there. The rapid rehousing dollars, it's working. And so ultimately what I will be evaluating once we do this exploration, which concerns me a bit because I'm guessing that's going to have to be a staff effort to figure out, okay, here's what the model is going to look like, but there's going to be a dollar figure to it. And then what I will be weighing is, this would be the cost for the safe parking if it's a housing focused. Is that the best investment of those funds versus some of the other efforts that we're continuing?
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Councilmember Schwedhelm has articulated my position 100%. Because for me, it all comes down to, it depends. Am I supportive? There are so many things that it depends on, and that's why I'm interested in hearing more. And so I am looking for more information. A lot of it is cost, and what is the best way for us to spend our limited dollars and be able to have the highest amount of success. There are cities all over this country that have wasted tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on programs that failed. And the solutions are there. The tried and true opportunities are before them, and they still insist on flushing these millions and millions of dollars down the tubes. We can't afford it, and I don't want to be known as a city that followed in their footsteps. So I'm interested in hearing more, and we'll look forward to that as soon as the information becomes available.
Okay. So first off, for me, the council has made a commitment to a housing first approach to this problem, and I need to see and I need to hear that a safe parking program can be part of that effort. So that would be at the top of my list, along with the cost of this. Where do we want to put it? I feel like the more sites we have, the more expensive it's going to be. So probably one site. And I've got concerns about putting all of our programs in one small neighborhood in southwest Santa Rosa. I would be interested in knowing whether the county would be interested in cost sharing on this, and that cost sharing for me could be in-kind costs, such as providing a site, vets building, fairgrounds, those type of places. And if we're going to be focusing on a site, we're going to obviously need to be doing some outreach in that area. So maybe that'll come later on, but it's easier said than done to just set up a site somewhere. So yes, I am in favor of exploring this further. Mainly, I want to know how it's going to fit into our housing first approach.
So I think we really clearly need to make a decision based upon our city and our city's experiences. I want to be clear that I do not believe safe parking is a destination. And I do not believe it is only maintenance. Past experience has shown that when we had staffed safe parking, that we did move people from safe parking into housing. And that was prior to our commitment to Housing First. You have heard from everyone sitting here that when we do this, we want to do this as Housing First model. So there's no debate about it being Housing First from our side, Housing Forward. I think we can place people from safe parking into housing. It's worked in our community in the past. We've had, I think, as many as 10 sites. I know personally of at least 4 that have had safe parking before we stopped safe parking. My concern about saying that we want a single site is that I would like the churches that are interested to be able to be maintained with safe parking services so they can be housing forward. So if a church or a private entity wants to do safe parking, I think we need to provide the Housing First services that go with that. I hope we can work that out. We've lost 5% of our housing stock. And we had a 2% rental vacancy rate. So we don't have housing right now. Functionally, we don't have housing right now. So we've got people who are drowning. They're out there drowning because they don't have a place to be. And I think that we can throw them a life preserver while we're building the boats. And I hope that we will do that, and that's what safe parking is. Safe parking is a life preserver, not just maintenance, but housing focused. It is our intention to get these people out of the water. But we're building boats, so let's protect them, keep them afloat while we do that. I agree we don't want too many people in one place. I agree with our mayor, which is why I also think we need to support the scattered church sites. I agree that we should work with the county on the Veterans Building. Parking lot has a lot of space, it's fenced. The VA building has a small kitchen, shower, and living room area. I would hope that we can join with them with regard to shared funding with the county. So by my count, we're split on scattered versus single. So I'm moving scattered, and I'm moving scattered not with the intention that we scatter sites all over the city on city property, but that we have maybe a primary site, but still support church sites when they come forward.
Can I make a suggestion there?
Yeah.
And that is that staff comes back with the cost of a single city-sponsored site, and perhaps the cost of providing housing first services to private groups.
Yes, I think that's very appropriate. So let us make a cost decision on those. So a single site, obviously single sites are going to be cost effective because you have economies of scale, but they may not necessarily be, and that may be what helps the service provider, but it may not be what's necessarily best for a particular neighborhood that is feeling impacted. So come back with some choices. I'll make the motion then that we come back with the costs for the two per the mayor's comments. It says services on mine. I didn't hear anything about a community center. I did hear about sanitation. So we need to know what it's going to cost us to provide sanitary services. If a porta potty or other services are necessary at the site, what is that? If showers, if hand washing. As I said, every single one of us mentioned housing focused, housing forward, housing first in some form. So we need to know what the cost is to providers for that. For what is functionally case management at these sites. So I've moved to confirm an interest in, it says here, exploring. If I thought I could get a unanimous vote for staying exploring, I would. I guess I want to say exploring seriously, because I don't want to send staff off to do a job and then come back and not do the job. I want to be really clear that my interest in exploring is seriously with the intent to move forward a safe parking program.
Can I suggest that we direct staff to return with information on all of these elements of a housing first focused safe parking program?
I consider that an exceedingly friendly amendment. You want a second?
Yeah, we could take direction. Don't necessarily need a motion to do that. We can take direction and repeat back what we're hearing and make sure we understand what you're asking for.
I think we have a motion. I don't see why we don't go ahead and let you know you have enough support.
Did you want to second that, Mr. Second? Do you need further clarification?
I think we have clarification.
Question from Mr. Sawyer.
I'm just to refresh my memory about the CHAP program. Did the original CHAP program include participation by the city as far as monitoring, or wasn't that purely a private endeavor always? I don't remember now the details of the CHAP program because we're kind of blending it into this motion, and does that mean that does that change its nature, I guess is what I'm asking. And if we can keep it away from this conversation, I'm just curious.
I think the question that is being made to staff in this motion is to provide information about what it would cost to turn that CHAP program into a housing first model.
I got you. That would be a different.
I'm happy to have whatever motion amendment needed to make it be a question that staff comes back with. How do we make the CHAP program housing first?
So CHAP is specific for private property. And if you're looking at city sites, public property, it's different than the CHAP program. We certainly have the CHAP guidelines in place that we can use to inform the program that we're working on, but and it's been some time since I've looked at the CHAP guidelines to see if they're, in alignment with housing first.
Well, if I may, I think just for clarification, what I think I'm hearing is a request to come back with the cost of augmenting the program, allowing it to continue as it's already developed, but then looking at what would it take to provide housing first services to those private sites.
So what I'm hearing is we're seeking to use at least one city property or city negotiated property as housing first safe parking, and we would like you to come back on that. And we want to ensure that our our other safe parking program on private property also meets the Housing First guidelines.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to issue a word of caution on CHAP. Even though there's been a lot of well-meaning and compassionate groups that have stepped up and either tried to do it or have done it, I also know there's a number of churches in this community that are doing it illegally currently. If we're looking at CHAP to being the complement, if you will, to our current program, I think we're really putting the wrong foot forward. CHAP, I've worked on CHAP for a long time. It has not produced the results that this city needs, and it's never going to. The only way it would was if we did something like a huge risk mitigation pool behind it that provided insurance and compensation for damaged properties to make people feel comfortable moving forward with that. I just wanted to put that up.
Mr. Rogers.
Does that mean you're not seconding the motion as it stands?
I will second it, but again, what I'm hearing is that the staff really just wants to hear what we have to say about this in direction, and I would just say, look at the sites that you've brought forward and create a budget for them in a housing-focused way. I really think that's what this council is looking for.
Okay, before we go on, let me see what Mr. Rogers wants to ask you.
It was actually along those lines. Those same liability questions that churches or organizations have in the community are the same questions that we have as a city about risk mitigation and all of that as well. I hear all the time from people asking how can they help with solving the homelessness issue. This is one of those ways. If you're a church, if you're a business, if you can step up and help and provide us options, and then we can add in the housing first components of it as well. I'm not saying that it's the only solution, but I'm saying that it is a shared approach to solving this issue and providing that level of certainty, especially during the rain. So I hear what you're saying about not relying on CHAP alone, and that it has been far underutilized, and maybe that's part of the conversation, is talking with people about why haven't you been able to use it, and how do we change the program in a way that makes it so that you can be a part of this. But I think when we have this conversation about safe parking, I think we do a huge disservice by only trying to limit it to city as part of the conversation. We're talking about what resources it would take for us to utilize city land and do the housing first. I think that it needs to have both components to it. What would the cost be as well for churches that wanted to step up, maybe some that are already doing it, for us to add in the housing first component to make it worth our while?
I'm sorry, I think that's what's included in the motion now. Is that correct? Is that how you understand the motion? Thank you.
Do you need any further clarification on this?
No, but if we could take a shot at just repeating just to make sure. So what we're hearing is that you're asking staff to evaluate safe parking program on city and private property, both on a single sites and scattered sites, and looking at the cost to provide housing for services on both those options.
And I would suggest that a small distinction here, we're not asking you to evaluate safe parking on private property, we're only asking for the cost of housing first.
Correct. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Schwedel.
Just a clarifying point I think I brought up last week. So back on the July 11th meeting where we voted on a number of different items, 2 items that were unanimously passed was the creation of a risk mitigation pool and another pool that would assist people to get into housing. We pay their first month's rent or move-in costs. I think this does go hand in hand. My earlier comments about weighing what's the most effective use of our funds unless we have unlimited funds. So I would hope that those 2 items that we already voted on and this council wanted to hear those options, if those could be included in the package too as you come back. Because again, if it doesn't, I'd be asking that question, well, in July we voted on it, and how does that play into our homeless response?
And point of clarification, Mr. Mayor, I heard you say not evaluating on private property as well. What I'm asking for, maybe it wasn't in the motion, and maybe my request is that it is in the motion, is also evaluating what the cost would be for us to If there are churches or businesses that are interested in providing safe parking, what the cost to the city would be to add in a housing first element.
I think that is in the motion.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask, all due respect, Mr. Schwedhelm, but let's vote on the motion that's on the table. And I think that staff heard what you have to say, and we all want to get that information.
Shall we call the vote?
Yes. Yeah. We're going to have a technology challenge again. Your votes. And that passes with 6 ayes. Thank you very much. Mr. Guin, 14.3. Oh, actually, we're gonna hold off on 14.3 because we are now past 5 o'clock. Thank you, Ms. Gomez. And this is the time for public comment on items not on the agenda tonight. Carolyn Eppel. She'll be followed by Ann Seeley.
All right. So my name is Dr. Carolyn Eppel. As was stated earlier, along with Michael O'Toole, we started Camp Michaela. And as some of you, I think, may be aware, I started a new encampment on Thursday from the people that you all rousted. So since we need to move forward and take care of those people, other people have addressed that rousting. So I want to start with you, John. You provided a generator for Solomon at Camp Michaela. Solomon died of metastatic brain cancer in July, but thank you. Chris, you let me corner you one New Year's Day and talk about homeless for an hour. And you listened and you acted on some stuff, okay? And I appreciate that. Tom, you provided 3 months of bus passes for the residents of Camp Michaela out of your own pocket. Julie, we all know what you do. Jack offered his house for a celebration for Camp Michaela when Jim Letty said that we couldn't have it at the camp itself. So I'm now asking all of you, and Chris, I'm granting you potential, okay? So I'm asking all of you to reach down and do this again. I am not well, and I think all of you know that. That's why I haven't been around a lot. It was extremely hard for me to get out there and do the work that was necessary to ensure those people could have a place to go without being under threat of arrest for another night. And in fact, I included my address on there in case you decide that there needs to be an arrest. Please don't arrest the people out there. You can come to my house because I was the instigator, okay? And it was me. So if you need to arrest for trespassing, that was me, Chris. So here's what I need. I need help getting a fire permit for the people out there, all right? I really need that. They need to have warmth. We have a place where the host team comes and hooks up to a water spigot. It's in a little parking lot kind of away from where we are. But if we could get that turned back on, that would really help, okay? Then we can hook up a couple of hoses, one go into Remembrance Village, which used to be Camp Michaela, and one go into the new place. And we'll have on and off valves so that water's not wasted. But we really need that, all right? We need an extra dumpster. We do. I'm funding a porta potty for this month. Hopefully we can get a second one out there. I can't do it for more than a month. The city needs to step up. I need help for these people. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Seeley, she'll be followed by Gregory if you're on.
Good day, Council, Mayor and Council. Ann Seeley speaking for Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa. I was very glad to hear Vice Mayor Tibbetts suggest a re-upping of the ad hoc committee to consider a housing bond. I don't understand housing bonds. I'm sure most of the public doesn't, what the pluses and minuses are, so that I hope that this discussion comes to a public place where we can hear about this. We have suffered a tremendous loss in this community. We have yet to hear what the public infrastructure costs are going to be, what has melted and what is unusable and what needs to be replaced. There's going to be a need for a huge amount of money. So I hope that you'll bring this conversation forward to us, the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Gregory Furon, followed by Michael O'Toole.
I'm afraid you've heard too much from me tonight, but I just wanted to say that 2 years ago, the Community Advisory Board gave my wife and I an application we submitted to CAB, a $1,000 grant for a porta potty. We've been trying to get the porta potty downtown at various locations. It still hasn't been set anywhere, and we're still committed to paying our $1,000 contribution to match the $1,000 that the Community Advisory Board put up. $2,000 to keep a porta potty somewhere where it can be used. This afternoon, I asked the Office of Community Engagement if we could put it at Vision Village. And their only barrier was that they needed me to get something from the CDC that said it was okay to put it there. I'm hoping that Margaret Van Vliet and the county can say yes, because that's the only barrier to having a porta potty that doesn't depend on Carolyn's money. So I want you to know we're working hard to try to not get a Housing First permanent encampment there, from my point of view, but to help people in the meantime to getting them into Housing First. From my point of view, having an encampment or a safe parking or anything else that is getting people out of the streets and not in a hospital or in a jail, it becomes Housing First when you don't have barriers and when you have efforts to get them into housing. It doesn't matter whether or not it's in a car or a tent or anywhere else. We're trying to get them into housing. We're trying not to have barriers to getting them in. If those two things are met, you're as Housing First as anything in the United States. And as long as we do that, we'll be on the right road. I'm committed to doing that right now. We need to get a letter from the CDC that says it's okay to put a porta potty paid for by you and I. Thank you.
Michael O'Toole, followed by Scott Wagner.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Michael O'Toole. I'm really confused. And why I'm confused? I'm really confused, and why I'm confused is quite some time ago, me and Carolyn Epple came to the City Council and members of the City Council and talked about doing encampments. We were here constantly, vigorously talking about encampments. When Jack was running for council, I engaged him a couple of times about encampments. He's not here anymore, John Krieger contacted me and asked me to forward information to Chris Rogers about Dignity Village and Coyote Village, which I did. Now I hear the council's talking about doing an encampment, and the people who have been asking you for 3 years to do this, I had to hear about it in an email. We have lived this life. Me and Carolyn Epple have lived this life. This is our heart and soul. And we're not asked to be part of this conversation. We haven't been brought to the table for this. That's almost an insult. At least I feel it's an insult. I mean, The people you're talking to, the most they've done is maybe a couple of nights out there, and it's like, I got to go back to my warm space. You know, I'm not comfortable out here. We stayed, and we suffered with those people. And Carolyn is continuing to suffer with those people. Susan Chunko is continuing to suffer with those people. I know, you know, I can't do it anymore, so I've kind of stepped aside, but I will stand here and I will talk on their behalf until I'm dead, because they deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to be brought to this table, and their voices need to be heard. They are the professionals. There's people running around saying, we're the professionals on camping. No, they're not. That lady right up there is. Susan Junko is. Something else that's confused me. In this fire we just had, there are people that have lost homes that didn't own them. They rented them. And now they're homeless. And you're moving forward with the sweeps and moving forward with the fines and stuff like this right after a major disaster in a community that is fractured. I work in mental health. I know what this has done to this community. Obviously, you do not, or you wouldn't be doing this. You wouldn't be moving forward to. Thank you. I guess I have to stop.
Thank you. Scott Wagner. He'll be followed by Cher Innes.
Thank you, gentlemen. I wanted to respect the argument about cost and accuracy. Hopefully John comes back, but I think that's important. And it's a respectable, perfectly reasonable thing to ask for, and it is hard to deliver. What I would like to see, I mean, this flew through my head as you were doing the motion, and please don't leave it that you are having staff explore this issue. I think we look to you for more leadership than that. And specifically, let me just make a recommendation, and you can do whatever you want, okay? But we, a lot of these people talking here, need to be at the table somehow with representatives, with the city, with Catholic Charities, and especially with the police. And we need to be doing it in a clear and somewhat ordered fashion. And what I would like to propose is that 3 members of the council get together in a subcommittee. 2 of you that are working on it a lot, and at least Tom and John or Ernesto. Somebody who's got concerns about the costs. Sort this out. Like I said, I'll send you a 5-page thing that's dumbed down from 95 pages that Homeless Action put together that lists precedents around this stuff that we're talking about. It's pretty light on parking, so I'll warn you. You are entering into a mushy territory there, and I appreciate that. But the other side is not. The stuff that I'm concerned about, you know, the scattering that we did under there, tent villages, you know, and I think the right way to describe them is sustained or sanctioned transitional villages. Those are a reality up and down the state and all through the world, and I might say through history, because it comes down to having communities that can do something maturely. It's expensive in a way. I put together a proposal. I'll be happy to share it with the rest of the council. You know, it is expensive in one way of looking at it, but then when you look at it per head per night, these numbers are ridiculous. I mean, I'm looking at $3 to $9 a night for somebody to live a life in peace with some degree of a potential for health. You can do this, and people are spending that kind of money and having successful programs. So please, get a subcommittee together, run the exploration, loop people in that know this stuff, like them, who live and breathe it, believe me. I mean, they move me to tears. Watch these people do what they do. You know, I'm sure some of you have seen that too. It's amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you. Cher Innes, followed by John Sugg.
Mayor Corsi, council members, my name is Cher Innes. I'm a lifelong resident of Santa Rosa. This is my hometown. I live in the West End. You may or may not be aware that there were homes in the West End that were affected the night of the firestorm. I know of two. One was completely lost to fire. The other, which belongs to me, was seriously affected by the winds. It's a tiny house. It's elderly. It was only holding on. Now it's giving up. I'm sure you know those winds were clocked in at up to 96 miles an hour. My tenant in that property is disabled. He's on a fixed income. I've been renting to him at a rate comparable to what he would pay as a HUD client. That's my service to the community. I've spent the last month desperately seeking a short-term solution to housing him so I can repair the structure. There simply isn't anything out there for him, and that's in large part because of his disability. I was even willing to pay market rent for him. There's nothing I can find because of his disability. I've tried everything I know of. It's not an exaggeration to say that he would not survive being on the streets. I would give him 2 days, he'd be dead. I'm here to ask you to take 2 simple actions on behalf of your constituents. These actions would benefit me and my tenant, but they would also benefit the community at large. As an added bonus, I don't see any direct cost to the city. The first is, please extend the physical boundary where people are allowed to place temporary housing during the next 2 years. Limiting it to the specific parcels that were burned out is not practical. Many of the lots in Coffee Park are not large enough to accommodate temporary housing and construction at the same time. 2, please direct city staff to consider seriously the use of modified storage containers as temporary housing during this time of crisis. There's a reputable company that's headquartered here in Santa Rosa that retrofits containers, has a great reputation, and makes them habitable for situations like we find ourselves in at this time. I spoke with the CEO of the company today and found he's been trying to get both the city and the county to approve these well-engineered, code-compliant structures. He's not been able to get any traction with city staff. As a side benefit, these structures could also serve the homeless. So,
thank you.
Please.
John Sugg, followed by Diana Christopher.
Hello, I'm John Sugg, a resident of Santa Rosa, and this is the time in which we get to change the subject and talk about things that are not on the agenda. We've been working with, I'm the president of the Sonoma Patient Group, a local dispensary, and we're working with the new regulations, and I'd like for the City Council to go ahead and move forward with the comprehensive cannabis regulations that are coming up in the meeting in December. And we're also supporting the planning department to get a budget for more planners to help deal with the expected number of applications that will be coming through. As we've been working with the planning department with the new proposed ordinance, we've determined that there's a possible unexpected or unintended consequence whereby, as an existing dispensary, we're unable to move because of the way the ordinance is written currently. And we believe that now and in the future, dispensaries may have a need to move if they lose their lease or so forth. But at any rate, we've prepared a proposed minor change to the ordinance that would allow for dispensaries to be able to move from one location to another within their own offset. we're essentially prevented from moving anywhere near ourselves. We could move far away, but we can't move near ourselves. So we think this is just a problem that we can work through in the ordinance. So thanks again for your time, and I mentioned that the next speaker was also with the Sonoma Patient Group and had to leave for another appointment, so Diana will not be speaking after me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bob Hanson.
Good evening, everybody. This city council is a lot more enjoyable than the last one, which deteriorated in yelling and eviction from the city council. What I heard was fear. Fear from a generation and a population in our city that's facing another winter, living underneath our bridges and under our overpasses. A couple city council meetings ago, Mr. Tibbetts made a statement that city directives should be on housing and our citizens who've lost their homes in this disaster. I disagree. City's focus should be on the citizens who lost their homes and the homeless. At least through the winter, shelve this housing first policy you're aggressively promoting until this can be put before the voters in the next election. Our city council does not have the authority to negatively influence the quality of life for the citizens of this city and not allow them to vote on this matter. The people I talk to, the registered voters of our city, do not want 5,000 homes in our city. 3,000 of them, single-family tract development. If it's left to this city council, we're going to have our houses from 101 to Sebastopol, and the people of Santa Rosa do not want that. Let's shelve this housing project through the winter. How many millions of dollars have we seen in the last couple months be approved for cost overruns on these city street widening projects? What incentive does a contractor have to bring a city project in on budget and on time when he knows all he has to do is come before the city council and any amount he requests will be approved? I've watched it over and over again. Let's house this until we can put this before the voters. Again, you do not have the authority to negatively impact the quality of life for the citizens of the city and not give them the vote on that policy. Public involvement. 2 months ago, Captain Rio from the Salvation Army, the managers at the Senior Center up at Salvation Army, and myself all decided to open up one of the buildings up at Salvation Army for transitional housing. 10 beds available for people who are willing to go back to work and provide them a safe, clean environment. We're still waiting on permits from the city. 2 months
Thank you,
ago.
Mr. Hanson.
Thank you.
Jim Mackin, and he'll be followed by Thomas Ells.
Do you have an overhead projector?
I do.
My name is Jim Mackin, 521 Sebastopol Avenue. Recently, I made this. Oops. There we go. I made this Phoenix for the Winter Blast Sofa Parade, and as I was, putting it away, I thought like it just kind of felt wrong to put it in a shed someplace. So I've been trying to find a place to install it, and I'm going to be putting it at a preschool that was burned down on Mark West. But you know, really, like, most of the work has been done in terms of making the artwork and making the program to laser cut it. So making more would not be that big of a trouble, and I could actually, you know, use the right materials to make it more durable. So I'm just trying to find out if, you know, I posted something on Facebook and I got a lot of interest from the community about, you know, putting it various places. So my thought is, you know, maybe I can make 5 or something and then, you know, move them around town for a couple months. But there are a few, you know, actually finding the right spots and installation, you know, all of that is fairly, you know, it's a little bit complicated. I know the city has a lot more resources or just the personnel and the places. So, you know, that's, I'm just looking to find out if there's any interest from the city or what could be done. You know, I can make it, and I think it would be a good, just kind of hopeful symbol for the city. So that's my request. It doesn't really show up too well in this picture, but that's a rose in the center. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can we ask this gentleman to talk to staff about our Art and Public Places Committee? We have a special committee that handles art and public places.
Okay.
So please ask staff for direction to that committee.
Okay. Right now.
Thomas Ells.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this time. I know that it's crowded. I think I got lucky. Somebody left. I wanted to mention about the wildland fire unit or the fire element of the general plan. And as I spoke to the Board of Supervisors today, development used to be considered, if it's permanent development, it's subdivided, then you provided permanent protection, if you will, from fire with fire departments and developed water. And if it was wildland, then you'd let it burn, protect that by having it burn out the fuel periodically and so on. But you didn't develop water there because it was expensive. So the question is really whether the areas on the eastern boundary of the city and everything that was affected by the fire, are they permanently developed? And I mean by permanent, 50 years? Would we think that that would be completely subdivided and look like San Jose in a 50-year time frame? I don't think so. I think it's permanently developed the way it is from that standpoint over the next 50 years. And if that's so, because we have a history of fire over that approximately 50-year period, it's going to come back. Probably with climate change, it's definitely going to come back and burn that area. And if it did, it would be very significant. The point is, so in that 50-year period, is it permanently developed? If it is, then we should really consider it permanent and put the water out there and the fire protection that needs to protect that area. That's going to be a concerted effort between both the city and the county. I think the city has water. We have the wastewater. There's a lot of water. It's going to waste right now. That water could go up there and provide protection at very little cost, relatively speaking. So I would like to ask that the council bring that back, have staff bring items back before the council so that you can look at how to develop water up there, what would be necessary, those areas around a key site, further areas to use the lake at what is Thomas Lake Harris, I don't know what they call that lake, and to develop other lakes. Those lakes would not necessarily be used for any other purpose but fire protection, not to develop that area. We consider it fully developed as it is. It's not about getting water up there to further development. It's kind of a change in the concept of what permanent development is, and I think we really need to do that. So thanks, and please do that.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. We'll move on to item 14.3, Mr. McGlynn.
Well, Mr. Mayor, really fast, if I could jump in. There was a question during public comment about bringing forward the change to allowing temporary housing, not just in the burn zone, but throughout the rest of the city. My understanding is that conversation is going to be taking place sometime in the near future. Could we give an update to the public on when we expect to see that?
Not at this time. I mean, I don't have a schedule on that particular item yet, Councilmember.
Okay, but it is on the agenda. It will be coming forward for discussion sometime in the hopefully near future.
It will be coming forward to the council for discussion, absolutely. Item 14.3, report, approval professional service agreement with Bureau Veritas North America Incorporated to perform post-fire recovery and rebuilding assistance. David Guin, Director of Planning and Economic Development, presenting.
Thank you and good evening. Also with me here tonight is Jesse Oswald, who's our acting building official, and Gabe Osborne, who is our Deputy Director of Development Services. And we also, Bill Rose, our planning supervisor, who is in the audience, who can help as well. We're here today to bring forward an item that was pulled together very quickly, as you'll see through the schedule. We had an unprecedented event. We took an unprecedented approach, and we expect that that unprecedented situation will continue for some time. And so as we're moving forward, just as a reminder of what we're trying to achieve is to address the needs of 31 businesses that were lost and approximately 3,000 residential units in our community, and how to bring those businesses and residents back into their communities and maintain them here in our community. So our goal is to, one, rebuild as quickly as we can, provide that service and capacity for people that want to rebuild as quickly as they can, provide the resources for them, but also to make sure that we're keeping an eye on maintaining our goals that we had prior to the fire, which is the goals that we had in our housing action plan to address our housing crisis. So this graph represents essentially where we have been. We started to see an increase in terms of housing production over year. We were on task to hit around 500, 600 units this year. By the end of the year, we do have some of those projects that are moving through the system now, and we're going to continue to move them through the system, and that's represented by the blue lines. We want to increase that over time. We have to get, according to our housing action plan, and our goals is to get closer to 800 and 1,000 units a year citywide to support our housing crisis and the need we have currently. On top of that, as you can see in this graph, we have the orange, which is representing the rebuild units. And assuming all those won't come in at one time, but a majority of those probably will see that first year, people submitting plans and permits to move through the process. So as you can see, this is a dramatic increase in terms of workload, a dramatic increase in terms of resources needed to make sure that we can provide the service. And so this goal, the effort of this goal was to find a solution to that. And so the way we approached this is we wanted to support the city's rebuild efforts and of those that were affected by the fire, identify a flexible and complete staffing model that we can put into place and adjust as needed, because we don't, to manage how people move through the system, who's ready to build and who needs more time, but to provide that level of service up and down over the next couple of years. Provide the capacity of our existing staffing to support and achieve the housing action plan goals and the needs of the rest of our community. So by creating a separate team to work on people that were affected by the fires, we free up capacity for our existing staff to continue to work on priorities that the city is looking forward to: hotels, housing, restaurants, and other businesses in our community. The other goal was to provide a dedicated resource for our fire victims and to provide expedited services and consistent guidance and direction to people that are moving through the system. So as I mentioned, this was a fairly quick process that we moved through. The RFP was issued on November 8th, and I'll talk a little bit about what that included. The proposals were due the following Monday on November 13th. We had a review panel, which I'll go over in a minute, to select the top three, and interviews with the selected firms that following Thursday, and then we're here tonight to award that contract. If this contract's awarded, we will begin talking with the selected consultant tomorrow to start working on logistics and how that's going to work. We've already started working on a space that will accommodate this, and our plan is to open the doors on Monday. The general criteria of the RFP that we sent out was basically to identify what, make sure people had the right skill sets that we're looking for to provide the services we need. And then we wanted to hear from them as well, how can they expeditiously work through the process, turn plans around quickly, reduce that time, and be flexible to our needs. So flex up and down based on the demands as they come in, and not have additional capacity where we don't need it, but to move throughout this, move as the demand moves. And then also, to keep in mind, we want to make sure that the people that were responding to this RFP recognize that the residents of our community have suffered a traumatic loss, and that this fire has basically turned 3,000 people into developers over the next few years, and that's a key component to, as we move through this process, to make sure that we're there for them, provide guidance. We're in there all the way through, and so that customer service aspect was critical to our selection process as we move forward. We required 8 sections to be filled out by the prospective consultants. In addition, they needed to agree to our terms and conditions and our standard professional service agreements. And so that was something that we did right off the bat to make sure that we can move this forward quickly. The review board, again, was made up of myself, Jesse and Gabe, who are sitting here, as well as Kimplin Robbins, who's our acting assistant fire marshal. And so we wanted to make sure we had perspectives from both the building, the engineering, and fire side. Those are the main components that play a part in approving a building permit. And so we wanted to dive in, see how they would be able to supplement our staff and work within our culture, work within our expectations and the timelines that we as staff feel are required for this type of response. We had a set of criteria that we let people know we were going to look at when we reviewed their proposals. Obviously, the organization and the individuals that were assigned to the project, have they done this before? And do they have the appropriate staff, the appropriate licensing and certifications that are going to be needed to move things through the system? And then also, do they have the technical and financial backing to actually make this happen? Because this is a big ask, and most people haven't seen a situation like this where we're asking them to help permit 3,000 units in 2 years. And then we also looked at what that cost would be. So we received 9 proposals. We picked 3 to interview. We interviewed 3 of them, and we unanimously selected 1 to move forward as our recommended consultant team. And that consultant team was Bureau Veritas and California Code Check. They are working together on this project to help provide the services we need over the next 2 years. Isam Hussain, CEO of Bureau Veritas, is here tonight as well to answer any questions if you may have of him. The structure we proposed, or that they proposed and we worked with them on, is to provide a complete, basically, essentially, a planning department dedicated to victims of our fire. And that meant us looking through where are all the pinch points, where are the bottlenecks, and making sure that they had staffing identified in the proposal that would address those potential bottlenecks. So that ranged everything from engineering, planning, fire inspection, inspectors, admin staff to help receive, answer questions, and even outreach material, being able to develop outreach materials with us to get that information out to the public. And so what was proposed was a mix of an on-site and off-site team, and that gave us the most flexibility. So we'll have a staff here on-site that will be the day-to-day interface with the public as they come into the office, and we can work with them, potentially do over-the-counter type reviews, having everyone in one room and working through the process together. And then when the volume increases and we have more complex projects come through, they can send projects off-site to their teams in other offices to help keep up with the demand and not have to have everyone staffed here if they're not able. So we wanted to have that flexible, nimble approach, and that's what's being proposed by the consultant. So how is this being paid for? It's basically 2 years is what we set this initial contract up for. The costs are up there year 1 and year 2. Basically, it's an average about $5,000 a unit for the cost to do plan, check-in, and inspection. So it's about $3,000 to do plan, check-in, $2,000 to do an inspection process through the building of a home. And so with that, we took some assumptions in terms of how many units would be coming through the first year. And assuming we see about half those residential units come through in the first year to apply for a building permit, and of those, half to get through the process of actually building and working through the inspection process, we would anticipate to generate approximately $6 million in fees, which would cover the cost of the staffing model. And again, on year 2, we're making an assumption in terms of how many would come through. But again, this would be ramped up and ramped down based on the numbers we actually see. We'll be tracking costs, tracking permits that come in, the turnaround times, and making sure that we aren't overstaffed and that the fees coming in are covering the cost of the work being provided. So where are we going to do this? We've identified room 6, that's showing room 5 there. We did an interim test case and set up a room over in room 5 to give people that had questions, private debris cleanup applications, and other questions for the rebuild. We gave them a specific interest. They can go in with information that's geared toward them with a dedicated counter tech and engineering support. That was tested out in room 5. We are moving over to room 6. We're in the process of cleaning that up right now, creating a lobby for people to actually fit the people that are coming in. We saw an enormous increase in people coming to our counters. Last Monday, we hit 200 people coming to our front counter in one day. Last year, we were shocked when we hit 100. So we've doubled that, and we expect that to continue in terms of the volume of interest and questions that are coming through. So we'll be setting up room 6. We are, again, working tonight. Actually, they're over there right now, and they'll be working through the weekend to make sure that we can be open and ready for people to come in Monday morning. That's our intent. Again, dedicated staffing. If this action moves forward, we're going to require expedited plan review. We'll be working with a consultant on that. We also want to open this up into a resource, make sure this is a resource center, so to provide other resources for people that are coming in looking for information, such as energy efficiencies, information on where they can find contractors and architects, and having clinics and other educational opportunities for people. And so that's something we're working on with our community engagement department and others in the city, and the county and Cal OES and EPA FEMA to see what other resources we can put in this center to help our customers as they move through the process. In addition, the outreach is going to be key. We are preparing documents, outreach materials to make sure that we can help people understand what that process is to move through the system, from removing their debris to designing a project to coming through our permitting system, all the way through construction inspection to where they get their keys and they move into their home. And so that's being worked on. We actually have an outreach piece that's our first draft is out on the street, and we're going to keep modifying that. We're learning, we're adding more stuff. We are just updated our website. We're going to keep growing our website. And I'm excited to announce tonight, thanks to these two gentlemen sitting next to me, that we have created a checklist on how to apply for a permit, what's required to submit a permit. And that's been posted on our website as of tonight. And so it's at srcity.org/rebuild. And that is a comprehensive document that tells people exactly what they have to submit when they walk in the door to be successful. And that's important because those requirements are going to help people understand what their process is going to look like. Their engineers or architects can look at what that means in terms of cost and help them provide understand the cost that they can talk to with their insurance company about moving forward. So this is something that we've been working on for the past couple of weeks, and we're excited that it's up there. And we can talk about that if you have questions on those requirements. So with that, that is our approach to addressing this unprecedented event, and we are recommending by resolution that you approve a professional service agreement with Bureau Veritas to perform a not to exceed amount of $8,800,000 $8,886,160, and that's over a 2-year period. Again, that's a not to exceed billable as work is performed. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
That number is a mouthful. Before I ask the council for questions, are these outreach materials also available on that website?
They're being put up as we speak, so we're going to have a digital version of that document, but all the content is up there, and we're going to have different formats that people can download.
Okay, thank you. Council, questions? Mr. Swedhelm.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. First, I have a comment or a question about the process that was used. And I get that, we want that flexible and nimble approach with the product. But, and this is no disrespect to anyone sitting at the table, everyone did the review is from Planning and Economic Development. Was there a conscious reason why a council member was not used or someone who actually has dealt with other plan checkers to get that viewpoint? Again, and this is no disrespect to who's being suggested here, it's just a process question. Can you share a little information?
Yeah, I understand that, and the timing was quick, and we made some decisions. This is a typical process we go through. We extend staff and we supplement staff with consultants. So we do this on an annual basis. But understanding the magnitude of this, I understand the concern, and we tried to look at it from every perspective, from the perspective of the homeowner, from the perspective of the contractor, the engineer, and then also as staff to make sure that they could be a true extension of ourselves in this department.
So I guess I would just encourage you, because we all have received compliments and complaints coming from the division. It's just a different perspective. And I think you guys are so far into the weeds in the woods doing an awesome job that sometimes it's a different perspective I think just might have been helpful. And again, I'm not suggesting you would have chosen another one, but actually defending the process, because I'm all about if you define the process so you don't have to defend the decision. I could guess that someone made, if there's 9 firms that made this application, 8 are probably disappointed they didn't get it. And it could be challenging for us to justify the process that was used for the selection. And for me personally, I'm very supportive of this due to the quality of the people sitting at the table, but just in the future. And I would totally get that because of time frames. Yeah, we asked, because council rotates. I had September, October, I sat on some processes. If none of us were available, totally get it. I would just include us in those type of discussions. So some questions about the presentation. So you showed us year 1, year 2. What about year 3?
Yeah, so our thought was to start the process, get through year 1 and year 2. We do expect that there will be people that are waiting until things will roll into year 3. When we get to the end of year 2, we'll reevaluate and either go out for another RFP and take a look at what we need and are the services working? Do we need to change the approach? And actually change the magnitude based on the numbers we're seeing.
Okay, and then can you share with me, in looking at the contract, the marketing and outreach, so it's my understanding this should pay for itself, relatively revenue neutral. But on the marketing and outreach, it says we propose an as-needed team to provide marketing and outreach services when needed for the city of Santa Rosa. You've probably heard a lot of interest in the council getting out with our community, making sure they're understanding what we're doing, what positive steps we're trying to speed up the process. How would that be paid for?
So right now, the fees that are coming in anticipate to cover the cost of all the services provided. We will be looking at where those costs are spent, how they're spent. So the fees that are paid for the actual plan check and inspection, those would, from my understanding, not be reimbursable by FEMA because we are charging a fee. But for items that aren't recoverable by a fee, we will be tracking those separately, and we more than likely will be submitting those based on some input from some of the experts that we have on staff to try to get reimbursed for those costs. The as-needed services are because, one, we have a joint information center that's currently active. We do have our staff at that joint information center. We also have a contract that the council awarded, I believe it was 3 weeks or so ago, with the Engineers Red, a local company who's helping us with these materials. But we also know that we're probably going to need additional support for the outreach component. So that cost is right now is anticipated to be covered by what we have coming in. If we see that not covering the cost, that'll have to come out of our budget, and then we'll have to reevaluate in our annual budget to make sure that we're covering that.
So you think the contract itself, at least for the first year prior to the next budget year, should be satisfactory?
I believe so, yes.
So then also in the contract, they talked about the plan review turnaround times. And so I was interested, the top one, a single-family residential new construction. Initial review would be 5 working days, recheck over the counter. Can you give me some context? Where are we right now if just with the normal, someone came to the front counter? I know it's extraordinary time. Even if you said, you know, prior to the fire devastation, where were we?
Thank you. So, unfortunately, we all were aware of the housing boom, so to speak, we were encountering. The turnaround for, say, a custom home at submittal of the first review would occur somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 weeks, potentially 10 due to the increased load even before the disaster. And then a recheck was typically half that time. So you say it's pretty unusual that a plan could be approved in one check. So you're looking at the first 2. So you're looking at 2 to 2.5 months at the best timing prior to the disaster due to the staffing we had on board at the time.
So again, looking in the future, so if I heard you correctly, we're going from, it used to be 2 to 3 months into 5 days.
Correct.
Let's go back to year 3. So for now we're setting the expectation that if we can do this, it can be done. How are we going to be managing that expectation? Or if I'm not in the fire zone and I'm still waiting, well, wait a minute, apparently it can be done. How are we planning on addressing that? Because that's a significant difference.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing now is we are taking a different approach to staffing model. So we're supplementing staff with consultants. So actually, one of them, California CoCheck, has been doing work for us. We have been coming back, and we're coming back to you soon to allocate funds that have come in over our anticipated budget through fees. Take that revenue and put that in and bring consultants on board to help decrease the turnaround time for our typical projects that aren't in the burn area. And so we recognize that we need that supplemental staff. We have to have the resources, and it's all about the staffing and the process time to turn them around.
So I've heard loud and clear from both developers and just smaller builders in the area that one of the biggest drivers is time certainty. So if you tell me it'll get done by this point, but then if we don't meet that expectation, how will these aggressive timelines be managed going into the future?
In terms for the 2 years?
Right, let's say for the 2 years. So we're saying 5 days.
Yeah, so it's in their contract. And again, they'll be reporting to me, and Jesse will be working with me on that. So we'll be looking at their turnaround times. We'll be looking at they'll be doing reports in terms of are they achieving those goals, and if not, we'll have to figure out why. If there's an issue with the system, if there's another bottleneck, we'll try to fix that. But if they aren't achieving those goals, we'll have to address those as they come up. But we will be developing metrics that we'll be reporting on a regular basis in terms of turnaround times, the number of plans coming through, the interactions, touch points we're having with our customers. All those are key pieces of information for us to figure out our staffing models and are they working and do we need to adjust.
And you will be sharing that with council?
Yes.
Would the same consideration be then for the inspection response? Because if it's an urgent or emergency, we're talking the same day.
Yep.
Other inspectors, next business day. And do you have an idea as to what is our current status, or even prior to the fire, what were the timelines?
There was a point 2 to 3 months ago when we were near 7 days, 6 to 7 days out, scheduling an inspection and wouldn't get it till the next day. Prior to the disaster, we were back to next day inspections. People would call on one day and expect to get it the next day, and regularly did get it the next day.
And does this fit into what you had shared with us, the different tiers about how you prioritize that? So will what is going on with this contract be consistent with what's going on in the rest of the city?
Correct. We anticipate and will expect the same turnaround, and with their ability as in their proposal to expand and contract staffing as needed, this is one of the elements that they're very attuned to, is to predict, and it is fairly predictable on the amount of plans you have submitted, when you can predict when you're going to need that extra staff to go do the inspections. So they are fully prepared to do that expansion of staff if needed to meet those times.
Great, that sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Well, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think all of us have talked about psychologically how important it is for us to move quickly to allow people to rebuild. We also started the conversation last week about economically how important it is for us to move quickly to begin to rebuild our property tax base that we've lost, and the way that that'll affect our budget going forward. So I do appreciate thinking outside the box on how we're going to do this. The 5,000 average between the plan check and the inspection fee means to cover the cost of this, we need to create 1,777 homes. Far fewer than what we actually need to replace, meaning that there will be additional revenue if we do our jobs right coming in. In the FEMA reimbursement process, are there going to be issues on the parts that we can get reimbursement for on bringing in additional revenue over what may or may not be reimbursed from them?
Okay, so one of the things that council is going to be entertaining very shortly, and I sent an email to council members about it, is we need to bring in a firm that is going to handle the public assistance side. Council member, this is an incredibly complex process. One of the issues raised was the speed at which this particular process underwent. We're going to be going through an expedited process, as I said in that email. We will have council participation on the panel for this selection, but these are the types of questions that we need some more assistance. We have some guidance, where the guidance is generally to do what you need to do to make sure your city is functional, live by your procurement rules. That ensures your greatest chance at reimbursement. But I will not shy away from saying there is expertise that needs to be brought to the table around dealing with, in a disaster of this magnitude, dealing with the complicated relationships on the state and federal side around reimbursement. We will be handling that. You will be seeing a contract in a very, very near future, because there's also an incredibly tight time frame coming pretty soon. Our federal and state partners haven't announced that, but we will expecting very shortly a contract, a declaration that says you have 60 days to basically put in your first pass at what your reimbursement needs are. Teams are out there right now documenting everything from sidewalks to CTT, the work in the storm drains. Every part you heard earlier this evening, how we had to reposition public works staff to do this documentation, because the documentation is the essential issue in seeking reimbursement. And again, that's why in this process documentation is going to be critical. Not if you have a fee and you're charging a fee, that's what you need to do. That's part covered by insurance for the homeowners, but it is going to be a complicated picture. So I don't want to get too far down the reimbursement trail, but that is going to be a huge issue for the city moving forward, and for the county for that matter.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. The reason that I asked the question, and you just hit on it there towards the end, is we do know that for many, insurance is not going to be covering the entire cost for them to rebuild. And if this is an additional $5,000 that is going to be pulled from their insurance in the rebuild, and then have FEMA collect it from us at the end anyway, or would have reimbursed it, I'd rather the onus for that $5,000 be on FEMA than it is on the property owner trying to rebuild. That's why I'm trying to get clarity on that.
Well, actually, if you waive your fee, you actually eliminate your chance for FEMA reimbursement.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I see two other bottlenecks. I like this plan in terms of getting through one of the potential bottlenecks on the plan check and then also on the inspection side. The two others, and maybe this is not the time to have the conversation, but I think that we do need to have it, is both on the initial architecture work that's going to bring the plan as a bottleneck, and then also on the actual workforce development side, making sure that we have the workforce trained to be able to build these homes. Because the assumption that we're going to build 1,777 homes, while important to have the plan check side, is not going to be a reality if we don't have the workforce to do it. So that might be an additional conversation moving forward, and I know people are having that conversation behind the scenes. What level of accountability are we going to have with the plan checkers, and how familiar are they with our general plan?
So luckily, if there is any luck in this whole situation, is due to the action you took with the urgency ordinance, we aren't going to have many hurdles with general plan zoning. That we have an amazing planning staff that are ready to step up and basically pass on and teach and work with the planning consultants that come in on how to manage any planning, zoning, general plan issues. Realistically, there aren't any areas that we're anticipating rezoning to any effect. There have been some suggestions, but really we're doing replacement homes on existing development, and we're providing a clear path for those who want to replace exactly what they had. If they want to make some changes or broad changes, we have a path for all of those that can still meet the intent and the requirements of zoning and general plan. So we do have a clear path, in our minds, and we've developed it from really early on that we're comfortable with the path that we're going to use for that, for everyone to whatever extent they choose to rebuild.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the questions my colleagues have asked previously. Some of them are on my list. I will try not to pound those again too badly. First, David, I want to appreciate what you're doing. There's something about how you're moving this forward that is fast, and I know you're working incredible hours, and I just really want to appreciate how you are approaching these things. Thank you. And thank your staff, who I was in the office a couple of days ago and couldn't believe the sort of level of tension people were bringing with them into the office, and how well staff was handling the sort of level of stress. I really want to appreciate that you're doing sort of trauma-informed service. It's not a department we expect to have that phrase, trauma-informed service, and yet you are rising to that, and I hope you will express to your staff how much I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're looking to expedite plan review and that you're creating a kind of ombudsman-like service for fire survivors. That's great stuff. Thank you. Like my colleague, it does concern me that a council member was not included in the process, particularly for as an expensive and different a thing as this is. I think he made the point well. I won't reiterate it except to say that I agree with what he said. I am also concerned that we have an experienced staff member who is working with, closely working with the plan review and inspection team in some way that, you can read rules and then there's the interpretation of rules. I forgive the analogy, but there's more than one church in town, right? And God didn't write the building code. So I know there's multiple interpretations of that code, and that there are some that are Santa Rosa specific. So I really want to know that there is some oversight mechanism for the code interpretations, for moving things forward in a way that is the Santa Rosa way. I appreciate that one of the firms has been working with us previously, so they're on to us. They may know some of the details, but it would really make me feel better following up Mr. Rogers' comments if we had some experienced staff member. I'm looking at slide 10, by the way. If we had some experienced staff member in this loop. Can you clarify that?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. And I failed to mention during the presentation, we have been in conversations to figure out how we can essentially cross-pollinate as our two staffs. especially the beginning. We need to have staff members that do this on a day-to-day basis, working with them, and we may need to have some of them backfill us while we're doing that. So we're working on looking at what that looks like, where that's best done, even at the front counter, plan checks definitely. And then Jesse is going to be involved a lot as these are moving forward to make sure that we are keeping our Santa Rosa way and our Santa Rosa culture and the expectations we have for moving these plans through. So it's a good point.
Cross-pollinating both directions.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know if that's the right term.
It's a good way both ways.
But we're gonna make sure.
Yeah, thank you. I look and see inspection. It doesn't say team. Just wondering, I had concerns prior to Sunday that we had overloaded our inspection department, that they were having too many inspections per day. So I really want to understand that we aren't on the third year going to return to that situation either. I know that somewhere in our plans back in the pre-fire days, we were looking at a rental inspection program. Are the folks that we're looking at under this inspection process going to be able to come on board in the future, and would they be suitable for this sort of shift to rental inspection if we were to implement that in the future, or are they very specific to this particular kind of building?
Right now, we're looking for building inspectors, so people that are going to be able to do underground work, obviously framing, construction, electrical. That's the type of work, the inspection that we're looking for on this project.
Yeah. Okay, so they don't also have housing in there.
At this point, we were very specific on what we were looking for this project, so I don't have the answer to that.
It makes sense. Under the engineering support, are we bringing on any specific engineer or engineering group that has foundation evaluation or fire foundation evaluation skills?
Yeah, so part of the team, we talked about there's structural engineers on the team, and then other engineering such as underground work, water, sewer type support. So we have a pretty broad spectrum of engineering that are going to be needed.
Structural engineering and engineers who can look at a foundation and say it's more than or less than 50% damaged.
Yeah. And part of the reason for this, part of the selection process was to look at the bench that the companies had, and again to pull from their vast bench of skill sets, because we even have in our you need to remind me of this HSC and basically an engineer to evaluate the soils reports.
Yes. Okay.
Environmental health specialist. Thank you. To evaluate the soils reports from the debris removal process. So we're getting very specific in terms of the services we're going to need as we think through this. And so that was brought up during the interview process and asked about what their benches can they support these different efforts, and so that was one of them that brought this part up.
I also really want to thank the consultant that is here. Thank you very much for being here. When we have a large contract like this, it really is reassuring to lay eyes on the person who will be implementing the contract with us. So thank you very much for being here. Changing back, how do we implement our housing, our HAP goals, our 20-some point housing plan that we have sort of stalled on, so that we aren't sort of flat-footed during a fast rebuilding process? Now, I understand there's speed in two places. I mean, we're increasing construction because of fire damage, but we're also seeing increasing construction without fire damage areas.
Yeah, absolutely. We're moving full speed ahead on both. So we're not stopping on the rest of the city and the HAP goals. We actually have a public meeting, I believe, on Monday to get input from the public on density bonus, inclusionary housing, and some of the other policy.
So those will be coming back to the council in time to not miss them during the housing.
We're moving on everything. We fully agree that moving forward on housing citywide is critical to the success of making Santa Rosa retain its workforce and economy.
You may have answered this, so bear with me. I wasn't sure I heard it right. It concerns me. I understand the desire to expedite housing that was lost. I think it's appropriate to give the public a choice about whether they rebuild in the fire hazard WUI, the wildlife urban interface, or whether they have the option to sell that property and purchase land in a less hazardous area. And we haven't, I don't think, really had the conversation because we've been so interested in facilitating the people who already know they want to move back. But I think it's an injustice not to give people a choice. Maybe injustice is too strong a word. I still think we should be giving people a choice and not tying them to land they've bought in a hazardous area. So it concerns me how we're expediting rebuild in the WUI, the wildlife urban interface fire hazard area, when I'm not hearing that we're giving choices, and I'm wondering if, did I hear correctly that the two staffs will equally be trying to expedite construction outside of the fire area for housing and providing the service outside of the fire area for how to locate places to rebuild within our city urban growth boundary? And, you know, are we discussing a mechanism so that folks don't have to build in a hazard area if they don't choose to? Because I would think that would be desirable.
We are actively looking at all housing types in Santa Rosa. We're looking at downtown urban housing. We're looking at, in terms of density, higher density, transit-oriented development housing, and other housing projects around Santa Rosa. Those are currently moving forward. And people always have the choice, and we want to provide as many options as possible to people to identify what type of housing that they want to look for, if they want to move, if they want to sell their property. But we also understand people may want to move back into their property.
Sure.
We want to facilitate them for that process.
And I'm not, what I'm asking about is the choice, but also our city's obligation maybe to offer to purchase properties so that it doesn't have to be rebuilt on in a fire hazard area. Are we looking at that at all?
So again, this is a topic we can take into consideration right now.
Okay.
But that's not the direction.
It's not on the agenda right
Yeah.
now. I would like us to have that conversation so that people don't have to sell to somebody who has to build in a fire hazard zone. You know, right now that's the choice they have. I'm also concerned about creating a silo that the public assistance RFP does, rather than looking maybe more systematically by just having the RFP for public assistance, but that's maybe to be discussed at another time. I again really want to thank you for the trauma-informed service, and I hope that we can look at some other options so that we expedite through our whole city. Thanks so much.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I'll start out by saying, David, I think this is great. I'm really glad that you and your team actually set up 2 plan encounters, which is what this council has been asking for the last couple of weeks. The way I see it, if we didn't do that, we'd fall 10 years behind on where we were on October 7th. So thank you for putting this in motion and, you know, taking this risk, frankly. I think it's a pretty safe bet. I'm going to be supporting it. But the only thing I wanted to highlight to you, and I brought it up before, is that in the contract on page 28, actually it's in the proposal, I noticed again that we're paying the contract and plan checkers by the hour. And I know you remember me bringing it up a few months ago about paying people by the permit issued and paying out a lump sum. I think there's just a better inherent incentive system baked into that model. Are we not doing this because we either didn't think about it in this particular instance, or is it because this is all that was offered, and is it a point that could be negotiated?
The nuances of developing, especially 3,000 different types of housing units, had us move towards the hourly rate. One, because we're going to hold the consultant to a turnaround time, which again is affected by the hourly rate. We also know there's going to be quick easy to review processes that are going to be much less expensive. I mean, an hourly rate will reflect that. But we also know that there's going to be potentially more complex people moving their house, doing a different type of development, maybe adding an ADU, a second unit. And so we wanted to be able to provide that flexibility to make sure that we had the staff and the capacity to deal with whatever comes our way. So if it's just a one lump sum per permit, you very quickly have a very inflated and a very unrealistic cost because you have to assume the worst on every project. So we felt that this gave us the most flexibility to respond to what's coming through the door and actually, again, holding the consultant accountable by turnaround times, timelines, our expectations, and again, the metrics that we can report on a regular basis.
Okay, that explanation helps a lot, and again, thank you. Great job.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to offer my thanks. This is an extraordinary step during extraordinary times, and I do appreciate that things moved rapidly, giving respect also to the concerns about the lack of council presence there. But I understand the pressure that was on you at the time. But I think that this bodes well for how the city responds to need. And clearly, the city manager's office and legal and the planning department and economic development, all those people that were involved in all the considerations necessary to come up with this choice. And it's a big task. But I appreciate in this short period of time that you came forward with this solution to help us get people back into their homes and to start Santa Rosa back on the track of being the vibrant and successful city that it is destined to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. And I'll just add my appreciation here to the staff that there's a recognition that we had priorities about housing before the fire, and we don't just have new priorities, we have additional priorities now. So we remain committed to the old priorities. I've been telling people for the last month that I don't want to get 5 years down the road and be celebrating getting back to 2017. This, to me, represents a $9 million promise to the community that we are committed to recovery, but we're also committed to improving our city and creating housing for people of all walks of life. And this is a concrete representation of that. I very much appreciate it. I do have just one or two questions, and you've mentioned a couple times that you'll hold these folks accountable for providing this, for being expeditious and appropriate and effective and flexible. But are there incentives and or penalties built into this contract that will make sure that we're holding them accountable?
We did not put incentives or penalties in this. I think the penalty essentially is if the consultant is not adhering to this contract in our standard PSA, our professional service agreements. We have provisions in there that we can take action based on lack of compliance with our contract. One of the questions we had in the interview, and I know it's just an interview, but was, do they understand what we're going through? Do they understand the situation? And everyone that applied and to support us said the same thing. We understand you have a lot of choices, but we wanted to be there to help and at least offer our help because everyone wanted to be part of this. So I think there's a desire on everybody's part, from staff, and we have staff members that lost homes. We've got people in the community, the engineering community. Everybody wants to make this successful. And so we're going to keep that momentum going. We're going to keep that pressure on. And again, obviously, at the end of the day, I'm held accountable if this doesn't pencil out. And so I'll be keeping a close eye on that to make sure that the community is getting what they're paying for.
Okay. I think it's going to be really important to the outreach part of this and really the hand-holding that may be necessary. At least at first, you've got 3,000 people, most of whom are not builders or developers, and they're going to be new to this process. They're going to be they're going to be experts by the end. They're going to be very familiar with all your faces, but especially at the first, I appreciate that there's an outreach component and I hope an in-reach component too, that people are greeted at the door and they're not walking around the offices wondering where to go and how to do it. How many responses to the RFP were received?
We received 9.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. I have some cards here. We'll start with Brian Lang. He'll be followed by Bob Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Brian Ling, Executive Director, Sonoma County Alliance, and we have 2 housing working groups, probably 2 of about 200 that have been created in the last few weeks. But I shared the staff report with both groups and got unanimous support. We in our industry and as residents are completely behind this proposal. Certainly appreciate the expediency that this RFP process has taken, and appreciate the expediency of the commencement tomorrow and beginning Monday. So I look at that one bar chart, 5,000 homes in 3 years is highly ambitious and pretty awesome, and then just all by itself. If the 2 combined staffs hit that, they probably learned a lot of process changes that we can implement as standard operating procedures beyond the 3 years. And we're loaded with optimism to see this move forward, and thank you very much to the staff and the council for getting this going.
Bob Hanson, he'll be followed by Charlie Trabusi.
Gentlemen, I hope this Veritas contract doesn't tie in with the resolution you approved a couple weeks ago, allowing contractors to house construction crews on the construction site. I witnessed this 10 years ago when the city of Petaluma allowed out-of-state construction crews in. And what happened was a contractor hired a bunch of guys off the street, bought them a set of nail bags and a t-shirt, and called them and billed them as carpenters, plumbers, and electricians, and they weren't. I have serious concerns about the quality of construction going on in the state of California, mainly from these out-of-state crews. All the carpenters I know have a home to go home to at the end of the day. They put in their 8, 10 hours a day, go home and raise their families. To the families that are facing rebuilding, local contractors, local construction crews, if there's any truth in the construction industry, it's you get what you pay for. What qualifications do they have to provide us with construction? 2 code, using materials, meeting California code specs. Have we checked into that? Again, to our community that's facing rebuilding, local contractors, local construction crews, they know our business, they know our community, they're dedicated to our community. You'd start bringing in these construction crews from New Mexico, Texas. They're not qualified construction. They don't have basic first-year apprenticeship skills. I witnessed it in Petaluma 10 years ago. I'd be very cautious about this. Thank you.
Charlie.
Good evening. My name is Charlie Trabulsi. I'm a civil engineer here in Santa Rosa. I'll be going through this process myself, and I wanted to come and thank the council and hope that they approve the request that your staff has provided. The task before them is overwhelming. All the design professionals I know on the private side are out looking for architects, engineers, technicians to help keep up with the tsunami of work that's coming our way. Last time I spoke to you, I told you I thought more or less. It was a moral equivalent of a war. We have the ability here to win this war. We have the money, we have the brain power, we have the technology. The only thing that's a question mark, and hopefully tonight you'll put that to rest, is the commitment. So if you make the commitment, it's our war to lose. We're not an underdeveloped third world nation that needs the UN or the US aid to come and help us. Berkeley, Stanford, Cal Poly, Davis, Silicon Valley are a few hours away from here. We have the ability to do this. All we need to do is to support your frontline people. In 30 to 60 to 90 days, they might come back and say, you know what, there's something else that came up that we didn't think of. Or you know what, this isn't a perfect formula. There might be some failures here or there. But unless you attack this problem head on, you're not going to get to the bottom line. The bottom line is it's a war against time. The longer it takes, the more people are going to leave the community. And then it's not going to matter what the budget is in 4 to 5 years. So thank you very much for your commitment. Thank you for supporting your group here. A few of you mentioned it was awkward that maybe somebody from the council wasn't as part of the decision-making committee. But I've worked with a bunch of these people. So have you. You have to trust them. You have to delegate to them. And you have to hope for the best, because that's the only way we're going to win it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trabulsi. Mr. Tibbetts, you have this item.
I move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving a professional services agreement with Bureau Veritas Incorporated for post-fire recovery and rebuilding staffing needs, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Let's see how our technology works. Don't use this for plan check. All right, your vote's counting. And that passes with 6 ayes. Thank you very much.
Can, if I may, I thought there might be closing remarks after comments, and there weren't. Can someone reiterate clearly where this is coming from? Because while it temporarily comes from the general fund, it is intended to be reimbursed. And I just want to make sure that the public who doesn't understand why we might argue over $100,000 somewhere else understands why we're comfortable with turning 5,000 into 6 or something like that.
Correct. So this is what you did was an authorization to spend. It wasn't to write a check for $8 million. The authorization to spend will depend on how the plans come in, the number of plans that come in. For every plan that comes in, there's a fee. That fee is paid, and that fee is designed to cover the cost of the service provided.
Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, 15.1.
Item 15.1, public hearing, application for rezoning from RR-20 rural residential to R-1-6 single-family residential to allow development of a residential small lot subdivision and 2 new single-family dwellings with a remainder lot occupied by the existing single-family dwelling on the 0.43 acre parcel located at 243 Middle Rincon Road, file number REZ 17-003. Patrick Streeter, Senior Planner, presenting.
Mayor Corsi, members of the council, the item before you is a rezoning for a property at 243 Middle Rincon Road. It's located in northeast Santa Rosa, on the major arterial Middle Rincon Road, just north of the Highway 12 intersection. The project parcel is currently developed with a single-family residence, as well as an access driveway to reach additional residences that are located to the west of the property. The applicant requests the rezoning from the RR20 or Rural Residential Zoning District to the R16 Single Family Residential District. The Planning Commission in September approved a conditional use permit for small lot subdivision, so the allowance of lots that are smaller than the standard of 6,000 square feet per parcel. And it also approved a tentative parcel map to implement that subdivision and made a recommendation to this council that you approve you introduce an ordinance to allow this rezoning. The rezoning, in addition to the one existing unit, would create the opportunity for 2 new units to be built on the parcel. It's a small, but it still is it goes towards our housing action plan of 5,000 units by 2022. A pre-application was held for the project in February of this year. One neighbor was in attendance and had comments about privacy. In response, the applicant flipped the floor plan for one of the units to address that comment. As was mentioned in September, the Planning Commission approved that subdivision and the conditional use permit and made the recommendation for the rezoning. The general plan land use designation is low density residential. That would not change. The only thing that would change would be the zoning of the parcel from RR20 to R16. That does implement our general plan, so it's consistent with what the city envisions for this property. The driveway that's existing would be maintained, so there's no loss of access to the other units. And as you can see on the site plan here, in addition to the existing house, which would remain, 2 new units could be constructed. The project was reviewed for compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. It's consistent with our general plan, which already had an environmental impact report prepared for it. A traffic study and a stormwater study were prepared to show that there's no specific impacts to this rezoning that should be, were not already covered in the scope of that original EIR. One issue that was looked at was tree preservation on the site. Some of the trees would be removed for the construction of the new units. The project will be consistent with our city's tree ordinance, so either the replacement of trees on site or payment of fee into our tree mitigation fund. And I believe the applicant has expressed a willingness to replant trees on site to make up for the ones that are lost. There is also one comment, in addition to the comment at the neighborhood meeting, one comment was received by staff today that's opposed to any new development east of Highway 101 until the interchange between Farmers Lane and Highway 12 is improved. So staff just wanted the council to be aware of that comment came in earlier today. Because the Planning Commission has already approved the entitlements necessary for the new units and has made the recommendation for the rezoning, which will be implementing the general plan, staff is recommending that the council approve the rezoning of the parcel from RR20 to R16. And staff's available for questions. I know the applicant is also available if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, are there questions? Any questions on this item? All right, this is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. Anyone who would like to address the council on this item? Seeing no one rise, I will close the public hearing. Mr. Rogers, you have this item.
I will move the ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa, amending Title 20 of the Santa Rosa City Code, reclassification of property located at 243 Middle Rincon Road, APN 182-210-013 to the R-1-6 Single Family Residential District, file number REZ17-003, and waive further reading of the text.
Second. Should I withdraw my second?
Councilmember, if you withdraw your second, I'm reading the whole ordinance.
I meant push the button.
Your votes, please. And that passes with 6 ayes. Thank you very much. We have no written communications. I have no cards. And we are adjourned.